Chapter 751. The Allied Army's tent was really big. Even with hundreds of people sitting there, it still didn't seem crowded. Moreover, those people were very quiet, so the spacious tent actually felt a little more quiet. This is an order from the Great Divine Seat. Bai Haixin looked at the people who were resisting with silence and said indifferently, "Don't think about the glory and respect you enjoy in the sex and the human world. You should know that we are in the army now. We are fighting against the Tang Empire. We are carrying out the will of Haotian." A cultivator in the see-through realm stared at him and said sternly, "Even the heavy cavalry can't break through. What can we do? Who can withstand the sound of the zither and the flute?" Bai Haixin said, "Since I want you to abandon your horses and fight, then you don't have to worry about your mounts. As for the sound of the zither and the flute, the Revelation Divine Palace is making talismans now, and they will be distributed to you later. I don't want to hear any more questions. What you need to do now is to accept." Without waiting for the usually arrogant cultivators to object, he continued expressionlessly, "What ordinary soldiers can't do, of course, has to be carried out by you. Otherwise, why would Taoism pay for you?" An angry voice came from the back of the crowd, "Aren't you sending us to our deaths?" Bai Haixin's face suddenly turned cold. Looking at the source of the voice, he asked, "Who's talking?" No one answered, no one dared to answer, and no one dared to speak again. At this time, there were hundreds of military powerhouses and cultivators from various sects in the tent. Usually, even if Bai Haixin was the general of the South Jin Kingdom, he would not make them keep quiet. However, they were in the Divine Hall Coalition Army. Everyone knew that Bai Haixin's words represented the West Hill Divine Palace. Not daring to speak did not mean not thinking. The cultivators' faces darkened. They all knew that the man was right. The West Hill Divine Palace wanted to send these small vassal sects to their deaths. They wanted to use their own deaths to consume the psyche power and physical strength of the Academy's disciples. Think about your sect. Do you want it to last for a long time, or do you want it to disappear like fireworks? Think about your family and disciples that you left behind in your hometown, and think about the great existence above the heavens. After saying this, Bai Haixin turned around and left the tent. There was dead silence in the tent. Silence represented acceptance. They had no choice but to accept it. Compared to the warm atmosphere in the verdant canyon, it was cold here. The rolling green mountains blocked the warm water vapor from the great swamp in the south. Qinghe Prefecture had always been known for its spring-like seasons, but it was already late autumn. After night fell, the temperature in the wilderness gradually dropped. A bonfire was lit in the barracks. The stars in the night sky were obscured by the silver glow of the bright moon. At this time, they were illuminated by the countless bonfires in the wilderness, making them even more indistinct. If one did not look carefully, one would even think that there were no stars in the night sky. More than 20 people sat around a bonfire. They were all disciples of the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom. All the disciples surrounded a man with extremely respectful expressions. The man was dressed in linen clothes and had his hair combed into a simple bun. His face was ordinary, but his eyebrows were very special. They were so thick that they seemed to be drawn with an ink brush. On the ground beside him, there was an old golden crown. In this world, only emperors could wear a golden crown. This man was not the emperor of any country. He was the emperor of the Way of the Sword, a saint of the Way of the Sword. He was Lu Bai, so the golden crown was beside him. The Divine Hall's idea will definitely not work. Lu Bai looked at the bright moon in the night sky and was silent for a long time. The disciples did not dare to ask any questions. They waited for the teacher to continue. It seems very stupid for the few people from the academy to stop an army of tens of thousands, but they are not. So it will not work if the Divine Hall wants to use up Jun Mo's strength. Lu Yiqing coughed twice in pain and said, "Mr. Second is powerful, but he is limited. Moreover, with his arrogant and domineering fighting style, it will be difficult for him to hold on for too long." Today, he had suffered another crushing defeat at the hands of the academy disciples and was seriously injured. However, he was not as angry and sad as before. He was still calm enough to analyze the situation. The Divine Hall thinks just like you. So it's all the same. Lu Bai said, you all think that Jun Mo is arrogant and domineering, so every time he uses his sword, he consumes more psyche power and energy and cannot last long. That's ridiculous. Jun Mo's iron sword, whether it's smashing or patting, seems to be more laborious than chopping, but it's not the case. That's because you don't understand that when you use your sword to chop, you use your strength to wear out the edge of the sword. But when he smashes and pats, he uses the heaven and earth's yuan qi. If you want to wear out that thick iron sword, I'm afraid you'll have to wait until the end of time. After saying this, the world's top swordsman took out a thin branch from the bonfire that had not yet burned. He slowly raised it to a foot in front of his eyebrows and then casually waved it down. The qi of heaven and earth around the bonfire moved with the waving of the branch. Several wisps of thin qi stuck to the tip of the branch and became thicker and thicker as he waved it, until it finally condensed into a ball. Lu Bai's branch finally fell into the bonfire. The ball of qi of heaven and earth that condensed in front of the branch dissipated when it met the fire. The bonfire burst into flames with a bang, and the flames reached 30 feet into the night sky, brightening up the military camp. There was an exclamation around, but after a while, it gradually subsided. Lu Yiqing lowered his head and thought silently for a long time. His eyes could not see, but his psyche power could clearly feel what the branch was doing. Mr. Second doesn't need strength to wield the sword. He uses the qi of heaven and earth to wield the sword, and in turn, mobilizes the qi of heaven and earth to help the sword momentum. This is not a martial arts practice, nor is it a method of the devil's doctrine, but different means lead to the same goal. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the verdant canyon where he could not see, and said in a trembling voice, this kind of swordsmanship consumes the least psyche power and physical strength, so he can keep killing. Your view is both right and wrong. Lu Bai threw the remaining half of the branch into the bonfire and said, you're right because you said what Jun Mo did when he wielded the sword. You're wrong because you haven't understood that he is not using the qi of heaven and earth to wield the sword, he is using the qi of heaven and earth to beat people. It was quiet around the bonfire. More than 20 disciples of the sword Garrett were silent, each with their own thoughts. They had followed the world's strongest cultivator and practiced swordsmanship hard, so they were proud of their swordsmanship. That was why they were always dissatisfied with the academy and disliked Mr. Second's pride. But now they understood that he had his own reasons for being proud. Lu Bai asked, where has Jun Mo's iron sword been? A disciple thought for a while and said uncertainly, the iron sword was in front of him when he was not holding the sword. Lu Bai asked, how far in front of him? No one paid attention to this detail. Lu Bai said, only I will pay attention to this detail, because this is what Jun Mo wanted me to see. The iron sword has always been 1.5 feet in front of him. Everyone was surprised. Everyone knew that the sage of sword Lu Bai's most famous sword Taoism philosophy was that the sword could not reach 1 foot in front of him. 1.5 feet was longer than 1 foot. So 1.5 feet in front of him was stronger than 1 foot in front of him? Lu Bai knew his disciple's mood at this time, so he smiled and said, cultivators must be confident, so pride is the most common external manifestation. I have seen many proud people in my life, such as Yi Su and the dead old man of judgment, but I have never seen anyone more proud than Jun Mo. The disciples were silent. And pride is the way to his death. Lu Bai stopped smiling and said indifferently, because pride is an emotion. A real swordsman cannot have any unnecessary emotions. A disciple finally could not help but ask, when are you going to fight? The Divine Hall is anxious, but I am not. The Tang Empire will not be destroyed in one battle. Lu Bai said, this battle of Verdant Canyon is a great opportunity for you to learn from the academy. Jun Mo is also my favorite opponent. As I said earlier, I will definitely wait until he is at his strongest before making a move. The disciples thought that Mr. Second had guarded the Verdant Canyon with his sword and did not retreat a single step. He was already extremely powerful and even invincible. Could he become even stronger? Lu Yiqing asked, when will Mr. Second be at his strongest? Jun Mo is an ordinary person, so he will behave like an ordinary person. That is why he spared your lives today. But when he holds his sword, he is no longer an ordinary person. When he starts to get injured, when he starts to get tired, when he discovers that his pride has been provoked, and when he starts to become truly angry, when everyone thinks that he is going to fail, that is when he is at his strongest. Lu Bai stood up and looked at the quiet verdant canyon across the field. He felt the warm aura coming from there and slowly put his hands behind his back. He did not speak for a long time. The disciples of the sword Garrett also stood up and looked in that direction, not knowing what he was looking at. The army is vast and powerful, but they are still in the mood to cook in the face of danger. Well, the rice is a little burnt, but the pickles taste good. The night wind blew gently. Lu Bai smelled the scent in the wind and said with emotion, "This is life. Neither war nor killing can affect the process. This is life." Why are the disciples of the academy so calm? It is not because they are confident, but because they are doing what they want to do and doing what makes them happy. So they take it for granted. My sword can take it for granted, but I can't live like them. Lu Bai looked at the verdant canyon and said with a smile, "The academy is really a magical place. It is a pity that the headmaster is gone. Otherwise, I would like to live there for a few years." The second day of the Battle of Verdant Canyon. The sky was gloomy and it seemed to rain. The smell of blood in the field was getting stronger. The millet porridge in the pot was also very fragrant. Everyone praised the pickles Sang Sang had made in the back of the mountain years ago and began to eat the porridge. They drank with great vigor. After finishing the porridge, they helped second brother put on his armor. Second brother walked to the field with his iron sword in hand. Seventh sister did not sleep well last night. She rubbed her tired eyes and said, "Be careful." Today, she was full of porridge. Everything was fine. I recommend a book called God of Heaven, book number 2507930. It was written by an old acquaintance. Please support it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 752. It was still early, and the morning light was dim. The field in front of the green mountain was covered with mist, and the light was dim. The dew on the grass reflected the light like black pearls. There were 5 swords in the field. They were the swords that second brother had taken from the disciples of the sword Garrett yesterday. He did not stand in front of the 5 swords like he did yesterday. Instead, he walked around them. The Battle of Verdant Canyon had lasted for a whole day. Instead of retreating, he took a step forward. Suddenly, a shout came from the depths of the mist. "Liang Xiang of Sanqing Mountain is here to learn from you." Sanqing Mountain was a famous Taoism sect in the southeast. It was just that the Lank Temple was too famous these years, so it was relatively unknown. In fact, there were many powerhouses in the sect. Liang Xiang was the most talented and most powerful young disciple in Sanqing Mountain. He was deeply loved by the elders of the sect, and even the West Hill Divine Palace paid attention to him. He was very confident in his swordsmanship. After receiving the military order from the West Hill Divine Palace last night, he was not as sad as other cultivators. On the contrary, he was very excited. He wanted to see if Mr. Second of the Academy could take his sword. So his voice was very confident and proud. Following this voice was a flying sword that overflowed with brilliant lights. The sharp and narrow blade was like an arrow as it easily pierced through the air and thin mist, whistling over. Second brother looked into the depths of the mist without any emotion. Without looking at the flying sword, he stretched out his right hand. There was a tearing sound in the mist. It was like countless pieces of paper being torn into countless pieces by powerful fingers. The aura of heaven and earth in front of the verdant canyon was torn apart along with the sound. The flying sword dragged a wisp of chi of heaven and earth and naturally broke apart with the tearing everywhere. There was a painful muffled sound in the mist. The whistling flying sword suddenly lost control and slowly descended. It fell into second brother's hand. Second brother held the flying sword and threw it behind him casually. With a bang, the sharp flying sword was deeply inserted into the slightly wet ground of the field. It stood side by side with the 5 flying swords from last night. The morning light gradually brightened, and the mist suddenly disappeared. The scene in the field became clear. A young Taoist priest stood there in a daze. His hands were empty and his chest was covered in blood. Looking at his expression, he seemed to be scared silly. He was Liang Xiang, the pride of Mount Sanqing. 2 disciples of Mount Sanqing stepped forward to hold his arms to prevent him from falling to the ground. Only then did Liang Xiang come to his senses. He let out an extremely terrified scream. Yesterday, when he saw the Sword Garret disciples' flying sword being taken away, he mocked the South Jin Kingdom people for not living up to their name. But now, when he saw his natal sword being taken away, he finally understood how it felt. How could such a thing happen? How did that man do it? Why didn't the sect elders teach them? His fellow disciples dragged Liang Xiang back to the south of the field. He stared at the gloomy sky in a daze and let out a few strange and miserable howls from time to time. His Taoist heart had been completely destroyed. Second senior brother did not notice these details. He had even forgotten where that proud young Taoist cultivator came from and what his name was. More and more cultivators appeared in the field, including dozens of military powerhouses who had obviously been immersed in martial arts for many years. They did not ride horses and all had fu papers on their bodies. Was this the West Hill Divine Palace's response? Second senior brother raised his broad and straight iron sword and pointed it at the densely packed cultivators. He put his left hand behind his back. The people from the academy under the canopy saw his action and knew that he was ordering them not to move. Since the West Hill Divine Palace was prepared, there was no need to play the zither and flute for the time being. The second cultivator to attack the verdant canyon was a rogue cultivator from Shaodong Mountain. This rogue cultivator cultivated in martial arts. He had been fighting with lions and tigers in the mountains for many years to improve his cultivation. If he was willing to join the army, he could be a general in the South Jin Kingdom, the Song Kingdom, and the Qi Kingdom. However, his life goal was to become the commander of the Divine Guards of the West Hill Divine Palace. That was why he had never left the mountain. It was not until the Divine Hall issued an edict against the Tang Empire that he finally had a chance. As long as he could show his powerful strength in this war, he would naturally be noticed by the Divine Hall. That was what the rogue cultivator thought, and what he did. He raised the heavy broadsword that had killed all the lions and tigers in Shaodong Mountain and roared. His feet stepped on the ground like an earth dragon and he rushed toward the verdant canyon with an unstoppable force. This itinerant cultivator's speed was so fast that even the air was buzzing from the vibrations. The cultivators in the field only saw a blur in front of them. The rogue cultivator had already rushed to the front of second senior brother and chopped down with his broadsword. Second senior brother's face was still expressionless. He raised his broad and straight iron sword and waved it. The edge of the armor that covered his whole body had a trace of his sleeve exposed. When he waved the sword, the sleeve did not even tremble. Just as Lu Bai had explained to the disciples last night, when second senior brother waved the sword, he did not use his own strength, but the power of heaven and earth. Therefore, his movement was very natural. His movement was natural. It was like he waved his sleeve. It did not stir up any clouds, but it swept up all the aura of heaven and earth in front of the verdant canyon. His arm and the iron sword followed the aura of heaven and earth. He used his heart but not his strength. The iron sword and the rogue cultivator's broadsword met in the air. The blade that had once killed lions and tigers was as small and fragile as a piece of paper in front of heaven and earth. With a cracking sound, the heavy broadsword shattered into countless pieces. The iron sword continued to move forward and seemed to hit the rogue cultivator's chest gently and calmly. There was a loud bang. The rogue cultivator's burly body suddenly flew into the air. After flying for dozens of feet, he fell heavily on the ground, creating a deep pit. After a moment, a violent and unwilling roar came from the pit. The rogue cultivator threw away the hilt in his hand and angrily crawled out of the pit. Then he fell back into the pit. He roared and crawled again. He fell back into the pit again. He did it 5 times. Finally, the rogue cultivator could not crawl anymore and fell to the bottom of the pit in confusion. There was a sound. He began to vomit blood. The blood was black, and even some pieces of internal organs could be seen in it. The power of the iron sword had penetrated into this man's incomparably strong body and directly shattered his internal organs. The rogue cultivator did not even notice it until he tried to stand up 5 times. The vibration made his internal organs, which had been covered with countless cracks, all cracked. Just like the seemingly powerful broadsword. Next, it was not one person who attacked the verdant canyon. It was not one sword either. It was more than 20 swords. More than 20 flying swords from cultivators of various sects from various countries. In the field shrouded in the dark sky, only the shrill sound of the swords could be heard. The swords were like rainbows and actually became bright. These people were all great sword masters in the see-through realm. There were not many cultivators in the world, and even fewer in the see-through realm. Only the Tang Empire and the Westhill Divine Palace could have the ability to organize so many great sword masters on a battlefield. The scene of more than 20 flying swords roaring and dancing was extremely rare. Even a powerhouse at the peak of the knowing destiny state would find it difficult to face such an attack. Second brother did not feel that it was difficult. He just felt that it was a little troublesome because he only had 2 hands. Looking at the more than 20 flying swords breaking through the air, he inserted the iron sword into the soil in front of him and stretched out his hands to catch the swords casually. Because his movements were too fast, it seemed a little messy. Only countless crisp sounds could be heard. More than 20 flying swords were all caught in his hands. His palms were not big. No one knew how he could catch so many swords. Those flying swords were held in his hands in a disorderly manner, like a really proud peacock who was too proud to dress up. It was really messy for a moment and it woke up and casually spread its tail to dry its wings. Then he threw these flying swords behind him. Those swords were inserted into the soft and wet field. The Haotian Taoism sect ruled the world. Even the sage of sword Liu Bai and the master of calligrapher Lord Wang were guests. No one knew how many cultivators were its vassals. This battle of the Verdant Canyon was undoubtedly the battle with the largest number of cultivators in 100 years. Countless cultivators and the powerhouses of the coalition army surged across the field and attacked the Verdant Canyon like waves, slapping towards the silent man standing in front of the Verdant Canyon. No matter how many of their companions fell, the people behind continued. This was what it meant to be wave after wave. However, the successors still could not take a step forward, and could only fall to the ground. Dozens of arms flew into the sky with blood. Dozens of corpses were thrown into the distance. Countless flying swords pierced through the air and then turned into scrap metal in the hands of the man. Yesterday, there were tens of thousands of arrows stuck in the field in front of the Verdant Canyon. It was an arrow forest. The vibration of the chi of heaven and earth caused by today's battle had already shattered those arrows into pieces. What replaced them were more than 100 flying swords stuck deep in the field. Those flying swords had different styles and auras. Some were wide, some were narrow, some were sharp, and some were blunt. But when they were inserted into the ground, they became no different. They were all so lifeless. It was a sword forest, more like a sword grave. Second brother stood in front of the sword grave, occasionally waving his iron sword. He stood at the very beginning and did not move a single step. His eyebrows were still flat, not even raised for a moment. He did not show anything shocking. He just calmly and silently waved his iron sword. From the first strike until now, there was no change in the posture, angle, or strength of the sword. He did not seem to know what tiredness was. From early morning to noon, he was so focused on every strike, so he seemed so casual. It seemed that even if he killed until dusk, he would not change. His body was covered with blood. The places where the blood flowed through the armor did not change, and the places where the blood dripped from the edge of the armor did not change. So the field in front of him was smashed by the blood, leaving a few clear blood pits. He was just like he had been in the past years, meticulous in both his posture and expression. Meticulous in killing. The more he did so, the more frightening it was and the more chilling it was. The crisscrossing sword intent in the field gradually became sparse. Many cultivators were consumed by fear and subconsciously stopped attacking. Suddenly, a cry sounded in the crowd. No one knew which sect the cultivator was from, but he was so scared that he cried. No one thought of laughing at that person. Because looking at the iron sword that was dripping with blood, everyone wanted to cry very much. That's all for today. There may be fewer updates in the next few days, because the end of the year is approaching. I have to pick up my in-laws when they come back tomorrow, and I have a lot of things to do. Then, there will be fewer updates in February. Because of the new year, there will be fewer updates. In order to avoid people saying that I will cross after crossing, I will increase the number of updates every month in March and make it clear before the month to avoid pressure and commitment. Another thing I want to report to everyone is about the annual selection, which is mainly the selection of the alliance leader. Although F and Old K may not really care about this, they are now in the top 10 of the alliance leader selection. I hope that everyone who has votes in their hands can support them. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for their kindness and generosity over the past year. I won't say much else. I will write a good book to repay everyone. Thank you for your hard work. In addition, I still like June Amo the most, so I will write more about this part. I had been holding back for a long time just to write about the Battle of Verdant Canyon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 753. In front of the Verdant Canyon, the sword chi was everywhere. It was dead silent in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army camp in the south. The great divine priest of Revelation put down the veil and said slowly, "I have never seen anyone kill like this in my life." Mr. Ku was probably like this when he joined the Devil's Doctrine. Qing Lixue knelt beside the sacred sedan and did not know what to say. It was quiet inside and outside the sacred sedan. After a long time, there was a sudden exclamation outside the sedan and then a tsunami of cheers. The voices of the coalition army were full of surprise and joy. Qing Lixue suddenly looked out of the sacred sedan and asked anxiously, "Did he win?" His voice trembled because he was very nervous. A priest in red came to the side of the sacred sedan and panted, "Not yet." Qing Lishue's expression changed slightly and asked, "Then why are they cheering?" The priest in red said excitedly, "He changed his hand. He is now holding the sword with his left hand." Qing Lixue frowned and asked confusedly, "So what?" The priest in red said happily, "It means that he will also be tired. He won't be able to hold on for long." Qing Lishue's body was a bit stiff. He wanted to say something but did not say anything in the end. He just waved his hand to let the priest in red leave with a bitter smile on his face. As long as he was human, he would be tired. Mr. Second was also a human. But that man had only changed the iron sword to his left hand and made them so excited. It could be imagined how much psychological pressure and panic he caused in front of the Verdant Canyon. It was still quiet in the other sacred sedan. Yi Hongyu lowered her eyes and put her jade-like hands on the bloody divine robe of judgment. She was silent. The cheers outside the sacred sedan did not change her expression. No subordinates dared to disturb her meditation with those absurd reasons. After a while, the coalition army suddenly burst into cheers again. The subordinates of the Divine Hall of Judgment finally could not suppress their emotions. A deacon in black walked up the sacred sedan and knelt outside the veil. He reported respectfully, "The flying sword of Taoist Chui from the kingdom of Song stabbed him." Hearing this, Yi Hongyu's expression finally changed. Because she knew who priest Chui was. Even she had some hope for Taoist Chui. She raised her head and looked at the black deacon, asking, "And then?" The black-robed deacon was slightly startled. It seemed that he didn't expect the great divine priest to ask another question. He answered nervously, "Then." Priest Chui's Taoist sword was broken, but that person seemed to be fine. Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and said, "Then what do you want to tell me?" The black-robed deacon became more and more nervous. His voice trembled as he said, "This is the first time someone has been able to stab that person with a sword. This means that that person can still be stabbed. Although it's stupid, there's some truth to it." Yi Hongyu looked at the verdant canyon in the distance through the gauze. There was no emotion on her beautiful face. She said indifferently, "It seems like it's about time." Almost simultaneously. In another divine chariot, the great divine priest of revelation stretched out his fingers and stroked the scripture in front of him. His old face revealed a peaceful and firm expression. He said, "It's almost time." A sharp and gorgeous Taoist sword had become several pieces of broken sword lying in the field. However, this sword should still be proud because it was the only flying sword that hadn't been taken away by the enemy since the beginning of the war. In the south of the field, a Taoist dressed in plain Taoist robes was looking down at his chest and abdomen. His name was Chui Rong and he was born in the Chui family of Qinghe County. He left his family when he was young and traveled around the world to cultivate. He was once worshipped by the West Hill Divine Palace and officially entered Haotian Taoism in the Taoist Temple of the Song Kingdom. Many powerhouses of Haotian Taoism had been hiding in the world, hiding in ordinary or even dilapidated Taoist temples. They didn't like the atmosphere of the Divine Hall and preferred to be ordinary Taoists. They would only appear in the world when Haotians summoned them to offer their power. Taoist Chui was such an extraordinary Taoist. Taoist Chui was not famous in the cultivation world, but his state was extremely high. He had entered the knowing destiny state 10 years ago and had his own position in Haotian Taoism where powerhouses gathered. However, he only made one move today and didn't do anything else. He looked down at his chest and abdomen quietly because his sword had been broken. There was a very deep sword wound on his chest and abdomen. It was a horrifying big bloody wound. The wet and soft intestines and other internal organs were squeezed out of the big bloody wound. It was a little slow at first, but it became faster and faster as time passed. Finally, it was like flowing water. Taoist Chui quietly watched his internal organs flowing out of his body. He didn't raise his head until the whole process was finished. He asked, "Mr. Second, swordsmanship is the most rigorous art in the world. The previous sword cut 4 inches into my body, not a bit deeper or a bit shallower. Of course, it was intentional." Second brother said, "Exactly." Taoist Chui said, "The Academy values kindness and forgiveness. Why do I have to suffer so much before I die?" Second brother calmly said, "Because I know your surname is Chui." Taoist Chui understood and said, "Mr. Second should know that I have little contact with the clan." Second brother said, "I want to use your death and pain to express the Academy's attitude." Taoist Chui asked, "What attitude?" Second brother said, "The 7 families of Qinghe County. Even if we die, we can't die happily." Taoist Chui sighed and said, "So that's how it is." After saying this, he slowly sat on the ground and began to pant. Because his lungs and trachea had been cut by the iron sword, he couldn't breathe no matter how hard he panted, so he seemed to be in great pain. After a long time, he tiredly bowed his head and finally died in pain. The sky was filled with dark clouds that blocked the sunlight, and the world was covered in darkness. Second brother was covered in blood. He stood in the wilderness, in front of hundreds of flying swords, in front of countless cultivator corpses, and looked at the cultivators in the south. He raised the iron sword in his hand again. He didn't say a word. But the cultivators in the wilderness seemed to have heard him asking who else was there. The cultivators' eyes were all attracted by the iron sword that seemed to have magic power. The iron sword was very ordinary. The body of the sword was broad and straight. It was dim and even looked a little ridiculous. But looking at the iron sword, everyone just wanted to cry. Some people wanted to cry, but they couldn't. They were frightened. The cultivators, in front of the iron sword, could no longer summon up the courage to fight, and finally retreated. It became quiet in front of the verdant canyon again. The blood on the ground had already accumulated into a puddle, reflecting the gloomy sky, making it look a little dark. The people of the academy rushed out from under the canopy. Wang Qi held a stool in his left hand and a medicine bag in his right hand. He rushed behind second brother and asked him to sit down. He put the medicine bag to second brother's mouth and swallowed it as fast as he could. Seventh sister was carrying a kettle and a bowl of water. Seeing that it was too late, she simply threw the bowl away and put the spout of the kettle to second brother's mouth, desperately pouring water into him. Second senior brother was not an ordinary person. He was unusual in all aspects. Even though he was surrounded by his junior brothers and sisters, he was still able to maintain his composure. He delivered the medicine with water and swallowed it in an instant. Fourth brother and sixth brother had also run over. They squatted in front of second brother and looked at a certain place on the chest of the armor with a serious expression. Taoist Chui's natal Taoist sword had pierced this place. When the Taoist sword of knowing destiny state pierced the armor, the talisman lines in the armor were automatically activated and condensed a thin and tough layer of qi of heaven and earth. Therefore, the sword did not affect second brother at all. But the talisman lines hidden in the armor were shaken by Taoist Chui's sword style and slightly deformed. Sixth brother untied the box on his back and took out a set of special tools that were as exquisite as crabs. He began to repair it. Fourth brother did some calculations and diagrams beside him. Then he looked at second brother and asked, "Is there any problem with the sword?" Sixth brother looked at second brother worriedly. The iron sword was the most important piece of equipment. If it was damaged, the West Hill Divine Palace would not give them so much time, even though the academy had brought the iron furnace and could repair it. Second brother looked at the broad and straight iron sword in his hand and said, "It can still hold for a long time." Beigong Weiyang and Shiman Buhua were still under the canopy. Their zither and flute were the best weapons against the cavalry. They had a mission on their shoulders, so they had to stay in the array. But seeing their peers helping their senior brother, they could not help but feel a little lonely and ashamed. Beigong rushed over and asked, "Do you want to listen to a song at this time?" No one answered him. Fourth brother and sixth brother were doing the final inspection of the armor. Wang Qi was checking second brother's pulse to determine his physical and mental state so that he could prepare the medicine for the next period. Seventh sister seemed to be a little more relaxed. She was wiping second brother's face with an embroidered handkerchief, but she was still busy. Beigong shouted, "Senior brother, this song is very impassioned. It is most suitable for killing." Second brother stood up and looked at the formidable enemies in the southern wilderness. He said, "Since ancient times, killing people has nothing to do with generosity or generosity. There is no need for accompaniment music. Don't be heroic, don't be generous, don't be unrestrained. You can only be cold, indifferent, and cruel. Only those who can truly do these things can kill all the enemies. Jun Mo is undoubtedly such a person. It seems that I still underestimated him when I commented on him last night. He is still the proudest man. I just didn't expect him to throw away all his pride or hide it in the deepest part of his armor on the battlefield." Lu Bai raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "He has been trying his best to save his energy and pursue a simpler way to kill the enemy. He is extremely stingy, calm and focused, unwilling to let go of the slightest change in the battle. He is extremely calculative. From this point of view, he is more like a stinky businessman." The disciples of the sword Garrett listened to their master's teachings in silence. They had been shocked by the man in front of the verdant canyon. Even though they were in the enemy camp, they could not help but admire him. Although their master was always the tallest figure in their hearts, they actually felt a little uncomfortable when they heard their master describe the man in such a way. But no one dared to question him. Lu Bai's voice rang out again. The disciples of the sword Garrett were shocked and speechless by the hidden meaning of this sentence. I respect an opponent who fights with such an attitude. Lu Bai looked in the direction of the verdant canyon and said seriously, I even regret letting him kill so many people in one day and one night. Maybe I should have done it yesterday. Finally done. Not bad, not bad. I'm just tired. Tomorrow is Saturday. Have a good weekend. Also, I have been revising the Vermilion Bird record recently and found that, just as I always thought, the attitude in the first third is not correct. There is really something wrong with the writing. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 754. Lu Bai stood up. The disciples of the sword Garrett were stunned. They thought of what their master had said and knew that he would not wait any longer. This meant that the most powerful battle in the cultivation world was about to begin. However, at this moment, the veil of the divine chariot fluttered and Yi Hongyu walked into the field. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army was in low spirits. When they saw the blood-red figure in the field, they became silent and then burst into thunderous cheers. Yi Hongyu was the real genius of Haotian Taoism. She had suppressed Prince Long Qing a few years ago. She was the last opponent Ning Ke wanted to face. Chen Pipi still held the record of being the youngest person to enter the knowing destiny state. But if she wanted to, she might be able to do it before Chen Pipi. This did not sound convincing, but it turned out that she could always do something she wanted to do, such as becoming the great divine priest of judgment. Seeing Yi Hongyu appear in the field, Lu Bai put his hands behind his back and stopped moving forward. Lu Bai had never liked the bigwigs in the West Hill Divine Palace, including the Hierarch Lord. But he had always liked, or rather admired, Yi Hongyu. It was not because of him that Yi Hongyu could sit on the seat of heavenly black jade of the Divine Hall of Judgment. The paper sword in the letter was drawn by Lu Bai himself. It was also because he knew that Yi Hongyu had never been confined to the realm of that sword. She had already mastered Haotian Taoism divine skills. Lu Bai still thought that Jun Amo was stronger than Yi Hongyu. But he thought that Yi Hongyu still chose to fight after Jun Amo said that she was no match for him. So she must be able to win. He wanted to know what Yi Hongyu would do. More importantly, he wanted to know the outcome of the battle between her and Jun Amo. So he chose to watch the battle again. The morale of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army was extremely low because of the iron sword outside the verdant canyon. They did not cheer up until Yi Hongyu's figure came into view. Yi Hongyu walked to the verdant canyon and stopped in the middle of the field. Waves of cheers came from behind her, getting louder and louder, and then suddenly stopped. Countless eyes fell on the blood-red divine robe of judgment on her. They were extremely nervous and expectant. Her appearance had such a great impact on the morale of the coalition army. The most important thing was her identity as the West Hill Great Divine Priest, even though she was the youngest Great Divine Priest of Judgment in the history of the West Hill Divine Palace. The Great Divine Priest of West Hill must be the Great Divine Priest revered by countless cultivators of Haotian Taoism. He was the god in the hearts of millions of believers of Haotian in the world. Who would think that a god would be defeated by a mortal? There were faint movements in the Divine Hall Coalition Army camp. Tens of thousands of people poured out of the camp and came to the forefront of the battlefield. They held long spears and iron spears in their hands and looked at the scene in the wilderness excitedly. The cheers and chatter had stopped. The world was silent. A knocking sound suddenly rang out. That was the sound of the end of the spear colliding with the wilderness. More and more people were hitting the ground with weapons in their hands, and the sound was getting louder and louder. Tens of thousands of spears and iron spears collided with the ground, causing it to shake. In the beginning, the sounds of countless weapons colliding with the ground were dense and messy. Then, it gradually became orderly and the rhythm became faster and faster. In the end, it became the heaviest sound. Boom! The drumming finally condensed into a thunderous roar. At the moment when the thunder roared, Yi Hongyu drew her sword. Facing such a terrible opponent like Jun Mo, she had to use her strongest sword. At the same time, her black hair that was bound by the golden divine crown was blown back by the strong wind. Her eyes suddenly brightened, and the divine starlight in the deepest part of her eyes began to burn fiercely. The purest soul could be seen dancing in the golden flame. However, the Taoist sword was still in her hand even though she had drawn her sword. The thin Taoist sword did not turn into a rainbow and fly to the verdant canyon, nor did it disappear in the wind. She held it in her hand and pointed it at the man in the verdant canyon. She did not draw her Taoist sword. But the sword had been drawn. The sky was gloomy. The wilderness in front of the Green Mountain was very dark. Suddenly, tens of thousands of white turbulence appeared between heaven and earth, piercing the verdant canyon. A streak of white turbulence was a sword mark. She used the divine starlight to see through the aura of heaven and earth and sent out sword marks with the Haotian divine skills. There were hundreds of sword marks on the ground of the wilderness, crossing the corpses and blood, and pointing to the verdant canyon. More sword marks went straight up to the sky and even into the dark clouds. Then, like feathered arrows, they fell in a perfect arc, still pointing to the verdant canyon. These sword scars were closer to the sky. They absorbed the heavenly light emitted from the clouds and refracted the heavenly light into rainbow-colored rays. They looked like real lightsabers. It was beautiful like a dream. Countless sword marks with a holy and solemn feeling came out from the tip of the Taoist sword in Yi Hongyu's hand. Then, some were quiet, some were swift, some were straight up to the sky, and some were still on the ground, piercing Jun Mo. Seeing this incredible scene, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army camp burst into cheers again. Lu Bai frowned slightly, a little puzzled. Jun Mo's armor was the best armor in the world. Even if it was stained with blood and dust a moment ago, it only needed to be blown by the wind for a while to become as clean as new. The bright armor was like a mirror, reflecting the scene between heaven and earth. The gloomy sky in front of the Green Mountain. The wilderness dyed red by blood. There were also hundreds of holy and solemn sword marks. With the dark sky as a curtain, those bright sword rainbows looked very beautiful. It was like a grand fireworks display. The fireworks on the armor were getting brighter and brighter, which meant that the sword marks were getting closer. Second brother looked up at the sky and did nothing. In the eyes of many, it was only a moment, but in fact, he had been waiting for a long time. He had been waiting for the tens of thousands of sword marks to finally become one sword. However, that moment never came. When he was sure that the tens of thousands of sword marks would not become one sword again, he slightly raised his eyebrows. Since the beginning of the battle, there was no change of emotion on his face. This was the first time. Because he did not understand why Yi Hongyu had used so many swords. At the state that he and Yi Hongyu were in, they both knew what real power was. Beauty was not power, like the fireworks on the armor. Holiness was not power, like the divine light in her eyes. Magnificence was not power, like the hundreds of sword marks between heaven and earth that amazed thousands of people. Concentration was power. The fireworks formed by countless swords were based on Yi Hongyu's profound West Hill divine skills. It looked grand and spectacular, but because of that, it could not be absolutely concentrated. Although the heavy rain in Chang and in summer was huge and frightening, it came and went quickly. After the rain stopped, it did not leave any marks on the ancient city wall. The dripping water in front of the eaves of the academy was quiet, but it persisted. After 1,000 years, no one knew how many hard bluestone bricks the dripped water had dripped. Second brother had never fought with Yi Hongyu. But he had seen the sword that Lu Bai had drawn for Yi Hongyu through Ning Ke, and also through Ning Ke, he knew what kind of person Yi Hongyu was. In his opinion, this little girl who had just comprehended Lu Bai's sword style and dared to enter the divine hall of judgment was undoubtedly the strongest of the new generation. She was stronger than Pippi. Stronger than Ning Quebec. Then it was impossible for her not to understand what real power was. Her most powerful sword strike was definitely just one sword strike. It could not be so many swords. Second brother had been waiting for Yi Hongyu's swords to become one. Because he had decided to defeat her when she used her most powerful sword. That was the only way he could be happy. However, Yi Hongyu did not do so. He did not understand why she did not do so. Even if she used her most powerful sword, second brother was confident that he could defeat her. But now her sword was tens of thousands of swords, which meant that she had lost in advance. Because she could not find a chance to win. Second senior fellow apprentice suddenly understood. Yi Hongyu did not think about winning today's battle. For the final victory, she could calmly give up her pride. Is this also a kind of pride? Second brother thought. Then he looked at the tens of thousands of sword marks coming to the verdant canyon and said, "Is this the confinement?" He raised the iron sword in his hand and slashed at the confinement divine array made up of tens of thousands of sword marks. He looked serious. It was not because of the confinement. It was because of Yi Hongyu's intention behind the confinement. The confinement was one of the most profound and powerful arrays in the West Hill Divine Palace. Kuharan drew a confinement array with the Haoran sword and trapped Master Lotus for decades. The former great divine priest of judgment also used the same confinement array to trap Wei Guangming in the Peach Mountain for more than 10 years. The confinement array made by Yi Hongyu with tens of thousands of sword marks was based on the Haoran sword mark she had seen at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Although she had reached the peak of the knowing destiny state, she was still far from Mr. Ku and even weaker than the former great divine priest of judgment. One of the most important reasons why she could kill the former great divine priest of judgment and become the new great divine priest of judgment was that the former great divine priest of judgment had been seriously injured after Wei Guangming broke the confinement array. With her current state, the confinement array made of Taoist swords could trap countless powerhouses to death. But it was not enough to trap second brother of the academy. This meant that she would definitely lose this battle. But she was not afraid of losing. Just as second brother finally understood, she did not want to win today's battle. It was very shameful for a great divine priest of West Hill to lose in front of hundreds of thousands of believers. But she did not care. Although her confinement array could not trap second brother forever, it could at least trap him for a while. That was what she wanted. A moment was enough for the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army to do many things. For example, charging with thousands of cavalry. And when the sound of zither and flute came from the verdant canyon, in the sacred sedan, the great divine priest of revelation stretched out his finger and turned the West Hill scripture in front of him to a certain page. The number of chapters on Friday is wrong. These 2 days are the birthdays of my father-in-law and mother-in-law. This year is my mother-in-law's 60th birthday. It's a bit hard and I feel sleepy while writing. I'm free tomorrow. There are 2 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 755. Etiquette is the principle. Second senior brother valued etiquette, so he was reasonable. Although he was strict and solemn, it did not hinder his understanding of the situation. Thousands of sword marks fell from the sky and surrounded him, forming a dense confinement. His gaze had already seen through the divine array and landed on Yi Hongyu's robe of judgment. He had seen through her hidden intentions. Everything was within the plan of the West Hill Divine Palace. To be more precise, it was all within Yi Hongyu's calculations. Whether it was the arrogant Jun Mo or the calm Jun Mo, they would both choose to use their swords to defeat her. Thus, she succeeded in delaying Jun Mo's attack for a moment. After a short moment, the myriad of sword lights had formed a cage, and even if Jun Mo wanted to change his move, it was already impossible. She attacked with 10,000 swords, but it was the sword of no return. She took the initiative to cater to the opponent's thoughts and opportunities, and had the ability to turn the design into reality. The process of starting the battle could be said to be perfect. She abandoned the pride and dignity of the great divine priest of West Hill and sought the first opportunity with the intention of seeking defeat. Then even second brother had to be imprisoned by thousands of sword lights for a while. The plains began to shake, and thunderous hoofbeats came from outside the sword curtain. Vaguely, one could see countless armored cavalrymen charging out of the Allied camp, their momentum shaking the heavens. The cavalry of the Divine Hall Coalition Army surged towards the exit of the Verdant Canyon like a tide. This was the fiercest attack by the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army since the beginning of the Battle of Verdant Canyon. Now that second brother was trapped in the confinement array, could the zither and flute in the Verdant Canyon still be as powerful as before? Under the canopy at the exit of the Verdant Canyon, Beigong Weiyang and Shiman Buhua quietly looked at the zither and flute in front of them. As they listened to the sound of hoofbeats, they slowly placed their hands on the strings or held the flutes. Beigong Weiyang's fingertips trembled slightly, and the faint sound of a zither left the string like an arrow. Shiman Buhua's body leaned forward slightly, and a dark flute sound came out of the pipe like water. At this moment, an aged voice resounded through the plains. The voice passed through the field and came to the exit of the Verdant Canyon. In the military camp in the south of the plains, the veil of the divine chariot fluttered slightly. An old voice rang out from the divine chariot. It was filled with a sacred and solemn aura that made people feel reverence. In the wilderness, preparing to depart. Anyone who wants to go will be able to go. More than 10 red-robed god officials with profound realms sat cross-legged around the divine carriage. They calmed their minds and listened to the voice coming from the divine carriage. Then, they repeated their prayers. The voice didn't stop. In the divine chariot, the great divine priest of Revelation looked at the scripture in front of his knees with an indifferent expression. He continued, "The seeds in the field are the food that Haotian gave to the people. The voice in the valley is the call of Haotian through the wind. March to the fallen land. Whatever Haotian told the believers, you must do it." More than 10 red-robed priests devoutly repeated the scripture. The great divine priest of Revelation continued, "Those who use their voices to confuse people's minds and summon for Haotian are all sinners. Together with the remaining sinners, they will be punished by Haotian's fury." The voices of the red-robed divine officials outside the divine carriage became more and more uniform and cold. "You will suffer the punishment of Haotian's wrath." As soon as a few sounds came from the zither and a short piece of music flowed from the flute, it was interrupted by the old voice that magically appeared in the Verdant Canyon. The academy disciples were well read. After hearing a few words, they recognized that it was the sentence of punishment in the covenant of the West Hill sect. Fourth brother's expression changed dramatically. He picked up the sand table in his hand and was ready to stir up the sand to disrupt the teaching. However, Haotian's teaching did not appear in detail. The voice of the great West Hill Divine Palace did not have a specific shape either. Nothing could interrupt the old voice except the voice itself. Beigong Weiyang's face suddenly turned pale. There was fear in his eyes. His arms trembled uncontrollably, and several strings on the zither broke. Shiman Buhua's state was slightly lower, so he seemed to be in more pain. He groaned and blood flowed from his lips into the flute. Then, he fell to the ground. The cavalry of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, who were charging toward the Verdant Canyon, also heard the solemn teaching. They were not affected at all. Instead, they became even more fearless. The tide formed by the cavalry seemed to have encountered a hurricane. They sped up again and headed straight for the Verdant Canyon. When the teaching began to echo in the field, second brother had already confirmed that it was the great divine priest of Revelation's doing. The Battle of the Verdant Canyon had been going on for a long time. The two bigwigs of the West Hill Divine Palace had never really fought. He did not expect that the two great divine priests of West Hill would fight at the same time. Second brother's expression became more and more solemn. As powerful and proud as he was, he did not dare to say that he could face two great divine priests of West Hill alone. More importantly, the Battle of the Verdant Canyon was not a battle between powerhouses. It was an attack and defense between armies. At this moment, he was waving his iron sword and chopping at the confinement that was formed by thousands of sword lights. Every time the iron sword fell, dozens or even hundreds of sword lights would shatter and disappear. If he was given more time, he could easily break the confinement and defeat Yi Hongyu. However, the cavalry had already arrived. The sound of the zither and flute had stopped. If he still focused on the confinement, his junior brothers and sisters in the Verdant Canyon would definitely be crushed by the cavalry. He could not allow that to happen. He could not afford to waste any more time in the confinement array. He had to break the array as soon as possible. However, no matter how powerful he was, how could he break the confinement in an instant? No matter how powerful the iron sword in his hand was, how could it instantly break the sword curtain formed by thousands of sword lights? So he withdrew his iron sword. He no longer tried to use the iron sword to break the confinement. He looked at Yi Hongyu outside the sword curtain and remained silent. He withdrew all of his aura into his body. At this moment, he was no longer the arrogant Jun Mo with the unparalleled sword style. He was just an ordinary person. Yi Hongyu immediately realized what he was going to do. Her expression suddenly froze. The confinement that fell from the sky was formed by tens of thousands of sword lights. It was a marvelous and powerful array. However, the sword lights still carried their own sword style. When second brother withdrew all his aura and lowered the iron sword in his hand, no longer contending against the confinement formation, the sword curtain formed by tens of thousands of sword lights suddenly collapsed toward the center and pierced his body. He wanted to use his own body to resist the tens of thousands of sword lights. Only in this way could he escape from the confinement in the shortest time possible. However, even powerhouses of the devil's doctrine like Tang or Xiahou would end up in a miserable state if they tried to resist Yi Hongyu's thousands of sword lights with their bodies. Second brother's body was just that of an ordinary person. How could he resist it? With the collapse of the confinement and the arrival of tens of thousands of sword lights, the magnificent fireworks on the shiny armor suddenly became denser and brighter, as if it would be ignited in the next moment. In a very short time, the armor on second brother's body released countless talisman intents, which collided with the countless sword lights coming from the sky and stirred up countless terrifying turbulences of the chi of heaven and earth. Bang! 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 The tens of thousands of sword lights fell on the surface of the armor, making extremely dense sounds of friction and cutting. Occasionally, there was a slight roar like a tiny thunder and lightning. It was extremely terrifying. The ground under second brother's feet suddenly sank, and more than 10 pieces of gravel were torn into powder. As for the grass that was stained with blood, it had already turned into flying ash and disappeared. The armor that covered his whole body shot out countless blazing rays of light. His whole body seemed to be burning, and no one could see clearly what was going on in the flames. The next moment, the wide and straight iron sword reappeared in everyone's sight. The iron sword cut through the countless sword lights and the friction flames on the surface of the armor, cut through the chilling air in the wilderness, cut through the whistling wind, and fell on Yi Hongyu's face. As the iron sword waved out, second brother's figure also appeared from the flames. He did not move forward. Instead, he took a step back. Since the beginning of the battle, no matter how many enemies he faced, he had never taken a step back. Now he finally took a step back. He did not take a step back because there was no way out. He took a step back because the younger brothers and sisters at the exit of the verdant canyon behind him needed his protection. The cavalry of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army had already arrived in front of him. Second brother looked up, raised his sword, and began to kill again. There was still no extra emotion on his face. His movements were as meticulous as ever, without the slightest deviation. However, the armor had already become charred black and tattered. The divine robe of judgment danced in the wilderness and formed a blood lotus in front of him. The sword style that came from afar, with the unique chilling intent of the iron sword, destroyed the blood lotus and then disappeared. Yi Hongyu's face was slightly pale, and blood seeped from the corner of her mouth. The confinement array that she had made with thousands of sword lights had been broken by Jun Mo in such a way. This was something she had not expected. But there was no shock or disappointment on her face. Instead, there was a calm smile on her face. She stopped watching the battle at the verdant canyon and turned to walk to her divine chariot. She had achieved her goal. The main force of the academy defending the verdant canyon was, of course, Jun Mo. But the most troublesome thing for the cavalry was the sound of the zither and the flute. Today's plan of the West Hill Divine Palace was for her to fight Jun Mo, and then the cavalry to lure out the sound of the zither and the flute. Finally, the great divine priest of revelation would lead the priests in red to break the sound. The whole plan had been executed perfectly. Although Jun Mo had broken out of the confinement array earlier than she had expected, she did not care. Because the zither strings were broken, the flute was bleeding, and the two disciples of the academy were no longer able to fight. And she believed that although Jun Mo looked fine, he must have been seriously injured. Because it was her sword. Her confinement. No matter how powerful Jun Mo was, he must have paid a great price to break out of the array in such an unexpected way. Yi Hongyu was very confident about this. She was most confident about fighting. Golden keyboard. We should have gotten first place in the annual novel contest. This is really. You guys are too good to me. Thank you. Although it's just like the past 2 years, I feel that I can accept it, but I'm still a little ashamed. I'll write more books in the future. It's still the same old saying. Recently, I haven't been updating regularly. This is my problem. It'll be better from today onwards. I think it'll be very, very good until the end of the month. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 756. The result of the battle in the verdant canyon had been decided. The zither and the flute were gone, and no one could stop the charge of thousands of iron soldiers. Jun Mo could not do it even if he was not injured. Even if Lu Bai suddenly changed sides, he could not do it. The academy could only retreat to the verdant canyon for a while. The West Hill Divine Palace had already prepared a plan for them. Yi Hongyu no longer paid attention to the situation in the verdant canyon. She turned around and walked towards the sacred sedan. Although she was injured, she looked calm and steady. In terms of state and strength, there was still a gap between her and Jun Mo. However, she was good at fighting. Most importantly, she was very calm and did not limit the battle to just 2 people because of pride. This was a battle between the West Hill Divine Palace and the Academy. She was not fighting alone. Therefore, this battle would end with the West Hill Divine Palace's victory. Countless iron cavalries arrived. Smoke and dust rose and the verdant canyon was restless. Second brother stood in front of the verdant canyon. The iron sword had already left his hand and turned into a dark sword radiance. It swept back and forth in the field within a radius of 1,000 feet in front of him. The iron sword was heavy and square-shaped, but its flying speed was surprisingly fast. The seemingly blunt and edgeless sword body tore the armor of the cavalrymen apart like tearing paper, causing blood to spurt out of them. Even if the sword only brushed past the enemies, the cavalry's chests collapsed and their bones were broken as if they were hit by a small mountain. The horses that were hit by the iron sword kept falling over. From time to time, the sound of heavy objects falling to the ground could be heard in front of the verdant canyon. The smoke and dust grew thicker, and the people groaned. Countless cavalries fell off their horses and died. However, human power was limited. Second brother's speed and angle did not show any signs of slowing down. However, everyone knew that the psyche power in his sense of perception was being consumed at an extremely fast speed. If he allowed this situation to continue, no matter how vigorous his psyche power was, there would come a time when it would be exhausted. What was even more chilling was that the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall were not afraid of the iron sword at all. No one knew whether it was because they saw the prospect of victory or because they were inspired by the teaching of the great divine priest of Revelation, but they kept charging fearlessly. The number of cavalrymen rushing to the verdant canyon was increasing faster than Second Brother's killing speed. Several cavalrymen successfully broke through the iron sword, brushed past Second Brother's body, and rushed toward the verdant canyon. Second Brother waved his right hand but did not recall the iron sword. Instead, he directly controlled the iron sword to slash across the field outside the verdant canyon. More than 10 cavalrymen were neatly cut in half like straws. Then he glanced at the cavalrymen. A long time ago, Ning Ke had asked Master Yen Sei what kind of state Second Brother's knowing destiny state was. Master Yen Sei thought for a while and said, "As long as he looks at you, you will die." Second Senior Brother glanced at the cavalryman. The psyche power in his sense of perception broke through the air and entered the minds of the cavalrymen accurately and wantonly. Although the cavalrymen were not cultivators, they had brains, so they died. However, this was just a scene on the battlefield, just a corner of the raging ocean. It could not affect the overall situation. When countless cavalrymen charged forward without any regard for their own lives, everything would be crushed. Su Shi and Shin Pippi both said that there was no cultivator in the world who could stop the cavalry charge, unless he had surpassed the 5 states and become an extraordinary being. Su Shi used to be the top military man of the Tang Empire, so he knew the power of the cavalry the best. Shin Pippi was a young genius of Haotian Taoism and had studied in the academy for many years, so he knew the rules of the cultivation world the best. Therefore, the conclusion made by these two people could stand the test. Second Brother was very strong. He had reached the peak of the 5 states and stood at the knowing destiny state for many years. Even when facing the sage of sword Lu Bai, he had to challenge his confidence. However, he had not crossed the threshold after all. In front of thousands of cavalrymen, he waved the iron sword. His armor was scorched and tattered, and his face gradually turned pale. He looked like a black reef in the raging waves, and no one knew when it would collapse. No one knew whether the headmaster had done it intentionally or not. Anyway, the disciples of the second floor of the academy had been at the peak of their respective fields for many years. When they were together, they were the most perfect and powerful combination. The combination of the second floor of the academy could fight against powerhouses like the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey or the chief monk of scripture with a slight change. They could also stop hundreds of thousands of troops from advancing, just like in the Verdant Canyon. It was a pity that the whole world was fighting against the Tang Empire. The academy, which could defeat any enemy once united, had to be exhausted and was forced to split into several groups. Several people were fighting against the West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch at the back of the mountain of the academy. Eldest Brother was fighting against the most powerful opponent of the academy. Although the disciples who appeared in front of the Verdant Canyon were equally powerful, they were not perfect. There were loopholes, and this loophole was captured by Yi Hongyu today. In the specific situation of the Verdant Canyon, Beigong Weiyang and Shimen Buhua played the key roles. Although their states were ordinary, they played a very important role. Because in the world, only the two of them could enter the Tao through rhythms. So they were loopholes. Because they were irreplaceable. So Yi Hongyu could use her own failure or even death to gamble on them. Beigong Weiyang and Shimen Buhua sat under the canopy. Their faces were pale, and there was blood in front of them. Beigong's face was full of unwillingness and pain. He stretched out his trembling fingers, trying to tie the strings on the zither again, but he could not exert any strength. There was only one string left. Even if he could play it, how could he make a song? Wang Qi took 2 handfuls of pills and nervously stuffed them into his senior brother's mouths. He said in a trembling voice, "I'm fine." Sixth Brother held an iron hammer and stood in front of the canopy. He silently looked at the battlefield not far away. He looked at the cavalry that had broken through the iron sword and was charging towards them. He slowly clenched his fists. Muyu looked at Second Brother's figure, which was faintly discernible. It seemed that he would disappear in the next moment. Her beautiful face was full of nervousness and worry. Her fingers that were holding the red string trembled slightly. If the cavalry rushed over, the tactical array she controlled would be the last resort of the academy disciples. But she knew that there were too many cavalry and their impact was too strong. The tactical array alone could not stop them. Fourth brother had participated in the design of the tactical array, so he knew this very well. So he did not look at the battlefield or the red string in Muyu's hand. Instead, he kept calculating on the sand table, frowning. Just as Yi Hongyu had planned, he found that he could not figure out any way to solve the current crisis. Because the strings of the zither were broken and the flute was bleeding. There was no one else in the world who could make the zither and flute play. At the bottom of the pit of despair, there was always hope. For example, at the bottom of a dry well, there would sometimes be clear water seeping out, and sometimes there would be a big reversal. Just when the cavalry was about to reach the verdant canyon. Just when everyone thought that the zither and flute would never play again. A zither played in the verdant canyon. The sound of the zither was crisp and gentle. But when it entered everyone's ears, it was a soul-stirring story. The autumn wind blew. A scholar came to the verdant canyon. A cotton jacket, covered with dust. A pair of straw sandals, thousands of mountains and rivers. The ladle broke into pieces after defeating Master Chi Mei, who had become a Buddha through his physical body. There was only a wooden stick at his waist. He walked to Beigong and picked up the zither. He held it in his arms and played it with his right hand. There was only one string left on the zither. His fingers fell on the string. The zither trembled slightly and made a buzzing sound. Then his fingers fell again, and the string moved again. It was just one string. Instead, he played a song. The song was peaceful and elegant. In the southern wilderness. The zither played in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. The song was like a high mountain, like flowing water. Who would have thought that it was just played by a string? Around the divine chariot, more than 10 red-robed priests were frightened by the sound of the zither. Their singing suddenly stopped. The magnificent divine chariot suddenly looked extremely shabby in the elegant song. Deep in the veil of the divine chariot, the wrinkles on the face of the great divine priest of revelation deepened at a speed visible to the naked eye. With a cracking sound, the bottom of the divine chariot broke and fell heavily to the ground. In front of the verdant canyon. Countless cavalrymen landed heavily on the ground, accompanied by rumbling noises. The peaceful and elegant music had no killing intent, but it killed countless people in an instant. There was dead silence in the wilderness. Only the sound of the zither echoed. Everyone in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was shocked speechless. Yi Hongyu, who was still in the wilderness, suddenly turned around and looked at the verdant canyon with a look of disbelief. The great divine priest of revelation, who looked older than before, looked at the verdant canyon and murmured, "Why is he here? Where is the Abbey Dean?" Beside the quiet carriage. Lu Bai looked at the verdant canyon and said with emotion, "You are lucky to see Mr. First in action." What shocked me most was that he had learned to kill. The sound of the zither was faint and faded away. Until then, there were countless screams in the wilderness in front of the verdant canyon. No one knew how many cavalries and injured warhorses were entangled together, struggling desperately. Eldest brother looked at this tragic scene and was silent. Yi Hongyu did not make a mistake. Beigong Weiyang and Shimen Buhua were indeed the loopholes in the verdant canyon. No one in the world could replace the two of them who had entered the way of temperament. But she did not know one thing. The disciples of the academy were not cultivating on their own in the back of the mountain. Although they were already the strongest in their respective fields before they were accepted as core disciples by the headmaster of the academy, they were willing to study in the academy. It meant that they were sure that they could learn better knowledge in the academy. It meant that there was someone in the academy who could teach them. This also meant that that person was stronger than all of them in their strongest areas. That person was not the headmaster of the academy. Although the headmaster of the academy knew a lot, he was a lazy and irresponsible teacher. Other than teaching the eldest and second brothers, the headmaster of the academy had been herding sheep since the third brother, Yu Lian. As for the core disciples, he basically did not care. Someone else was responsible for teaching these disciples. That person was Li Man. He was the eldest brother of the academy. All these years, he had been teaching in the back of the mountain on behalf of the master. Except for talisman Taoism and fighting, he knew everything that the disciples could do. Whether it was zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, or cooking. And he was very strong. All kinds of strongest. The strongest in the world. Good night, everyone. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 757. Eldest brother put down the zither and clapped his hands, sending 2 streams of aura into Beigong and Shimon's bodies. Then he lowered his head and began to repair the zither and the flute. Jun Mo, covered in blood, walked back from the field and bowed to eldest brother. Everyone from the academy came back to their senses and bowed to eldest brother. Eldest brother returned the bow and said, "Thank you." Everyone noticed the blood on eldest brother's cotton gown and knew that the battle between him and the Abbey Dean was more dangerous and difficult than the Battle of Verdant Canyon, so they were very worried. Eldest brother did not want them to worry, so he looked up at the canopy and said, "This seems to be used by the back mountain to block the sun. You actually used it to block arrows. It's not bad, but you have to be careful of the flying swords." Then he rearranged the tactical array and arrangement in front of the Verdant Canyon. The autumn wind blew again. His cotton-padded robe was sliced open by the Taoist sword. Cotton peeked out from the cracks and trembled slightly in the wind. Then, it turned into shadows. Eldest brother's figure disappeared under the canopy. In the field in front of the Green Mountain, Yi Hongyu summoned her Taoist sword to protect her Taoist heart. Her face was full of solemnity. She did not know if the figure would appear in front of her in the next moment. In the south of the field, in the Westhill Divine Palace Coalition Army camp, the disciples of the Sword Garret looked around as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Lu Bai sat quietly beside the ashes from last night. He looked calm and the sword on his knees was in its sheath. No one knew where Mr. First of the Academy had gone. But everyone could guess that he would definitely come here. The next moment, eldest brother's figure appeared in the Westhill Divine Palace Coalition Army in the south of the field. He looked at the old great divine priest of revelation in the depths of the divine chariot through layers of gauze and pulled out the short wooden stick from his waist. The great divine priest of revelation looked at the scholar outside the gauze, and the wrinkles on his face deepened. More than a dozen red-robed priests shouted and rushed to the divine chariot. Eldest brother held the short wooden stick and looked at the great divine priest of revelation outside the gauze, but did not do anything. Those red-clothed divine adjudicators were sent flying like stones and fell heavily onto the ground, sending up mud and dust. They were all unconscious, and on each of their foreheads was a clear red and swollen mark. The starlight in the depths of the great divine priest of revelation's eyes suddenly burned. Wherever he looked, layers of gauze also burned, as if they had become the divine fire of Haotian's divine kingdom, blocking in front of the eldest brother. The eldest senior brother raised the wooden stick in his hand. His cotton-padded jacket trembled slightly, leaving behind an afterimage. He still seemed to be quietly standing outside the divine chariot, standing outside the layers of burning gauze. At the end of the shadow, there was another Shen Lian. He had crossed the horrible divine fire and came to the front of the great divine priest of revelation. The great divine priest of revelation looked at him and said expressionlessly, "Those who believe in Haotian," eldest brother said, "Z does not speak." The great divine priest of revelation stopped talking. Eldest senior brother raised his cudgel and struck. Looking at the wooden stick breaking through the air, the great divine priest of revelation saw 4,892 possibilities in a moment. The scripture in front of him shone with boundless light. He hid his true form in the light. He did not hesitate to damage his Taoist heart to see the future, so he avoided the 4,892 possibilities. The eldest senior brother stood in front of him, holding the wooden stick and striking down simply. This strike seemed simple, but it was actually very complicated. In this short period of time, the short stick had been swung 4,893 times. In the end, it was still a blow on the head. There was a dull sound of collision in the divine chariot. Countless turbulence of the aura of heaven and earth sprayed around like a hurricane. Those curtains that had been ignited by the divine fire instantly turned into countless charred butterflies, flying all over the field. The scripture, which was shining with boundless light, turned into dust in the autumn wind. The body of the great divine priest of revelation reappeared in the divine chariot, sitting cross-legged and covered with blood. The eldest senior brother's strike had hit the great divine priest of revelation's forehead, and also hit his Taoist heart. Just a blow on the head had caused the great divine priest of revelation to suffer irreparable injuries. The blood that wasn't thick, even a bit chilly, continuously flowed along the wrinkles on his face. It was as if a torrential rain suddenly descended on a dried-up mountain stream. But he looked very calm, because he knew his ending from the moment he heard the sound of the zither. When the Buddhism and Taoism sects ambushed Ning Ke and Sang Sang in the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom, they were about to succeed. But in the end, because of the sound of the zither, an irreversible change occurred. There were indeed not many new things in the world. Mr. First is indeed Mr. First. The Academy set up the ambush in the verdant canyon, so they had already set the coordinates. The Divine Hall did not think of this, so it is natural that they failed. The great divine priest of revelation looked at the eldest senior brother and said. The eldest senior brother knew why the great divine priest wanted to talk to him at this time, but he felt it was rude not to answer, so he replied, "So the Abbey Dean will arrive later than me. I want to hurry up and do something." The quiet carriage was not far from the divine chariot. When the divine chariot turned into a burning train and then into the bleak autumn leaves, the coalition army of the divine hall exclaimed in shock and horror. The disciples of the sword Garrett turned pale. The expression on Lu Bai's face finally changed. He was no longer as calm as before. The sword was still on his knees, but just like his mood, it seemed to feel some kind of threat and became excited and vigilant. The sword buzzed slightly and half of the sword was out of the scabbard. 2 years ago, in the autumn, he had met Mr. First in the sword garret. At that time, he sat by the pond and Mr. First stood in front of him. Mr. First could move tens of thousands of miles, and so could his sword. So even though he called back the flying sword, he was very calm. Because he was sure that no matter how high Mr. First's state was, he could not threaten him. Today, on the field in front of Green Mountain, he saw the figure of the scholar again and was a little surprised by his progress. But when the divine chariot turned into ruins, he was sure that gentle guy had really learned to fight. A person who knew everything except fighting and could be the strongest in the world. Now that he had even learned to fight, could he also be the strongest in this aspect? Who could be a match for him? Lu Bai slowly reached out and held the slightly vibrating hilt with a happy expression on his face. It was really a good thing to have such an opponent in the world. However, what made him feel a little disappointed was that this battle did not happen. Eldest brother left. He played a murderous song with a string and injured a great divine priest of West Hill with a wooden stick. Then he left quietly. He came in a hurry and left in a hurry. The reason for this. It was because a Taoist appeared on the field in front of the verdant canyon. The Taoist was dressed in green. Today's writing was a little hard. There is no need to name the chapter. This is more suitable. There is another chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 758. In the past 2 days, on the island, at the foot of Hua Mountain, in the town, in the city, in the green gauze tent, and many other places in the world, there were always 2 figures appearing one after another. The former wore a cotton-padded jacket, and the latter wore a cyan Taoist robe. This was a battle above the 5 states, a chase between distanceless states. Both of them were distanceless, but there was still a difference in their states. The eldest brother had bought some time in front of the verdant canyon today because the academy had prepared in advance. But he knew that this time would be extremely short, so he left in a hurry. The moment his figure disappeared, the Taoist in indigo arrived in front of the verdant canyon. Countless pairs of eyes fell on the Taoist in indigo in the wilderness. This was the first time the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey appeared in front of the world. Yi Hongyu knelt down to the back of the Taoist in indigo in the distance and bowed her head respectfully. The sound of armor rubbing against each other sounded like waves of wheat. Many people knelt down. The disciples of the academy in front of the verdant canyon did not kneel or bow. They silently looked at the powerhouse of Haotian Taoism, slightly pale, but firm. The second brother looked at the Taoist in indigo, walked out of the tent, and raised the iron sword in his hand. The Taoist in indigo glanced at him without any expression on his face. Then he turned to the southern wilderness and looked at the burning divine chariot. He frowned slightly and felt the subtle changes in the aura of heaven and earth. His Taoist heart suddenly showed signs of restlessness. It was not because the divine chariot was destroyed, nor was it because the great divine priest of revelation was seriously injured. For the secluded Jishou Abbey, only the belief of Haotian was really important. Even if the West Hill Divine Palace was destroyed, it was not a big deal. What made the Taoist in indigo uneasy was where the eldest brother's next journey would end. With his Taoist heart slightly disturbed, the Taoist in indigo knew that he had to leave immediately. This meant that the academy had calculated the time difference very clearly and did not give him any time to take action. This was the goal that the academy had to achieve. The eldest brother appeared in front of the verdant canyon and immediately turned the tide, destroying the most important combat power of the West Hill Divine Palace. If the Taoist in indigo had time to take action, how many disciples of the academy in front of the verdant canyon would have survived? This time difference was calculated by the eldest brother and the fourth brother after several nights of calculation. They believed that there should be no problem. However, they still underestimated the Taoist in indigo's strength. The strongest cultivator of the Taoist sect, the lonely man under Hao Tian, his realm was unfathomable and unfathomable. In the prior plan, the academy was sure that the Taoist in indigo had to chase after the eldest brother and leave without any time to attack. However, they did not expect that the Taoist in indigo could attack at the same time. The Taoist in indigo turned around and walked toward the southern wilderness. He casually waved his right hand behind him. As his footsteps landed on the soft soil, the harsh autumn air suddenly became cold. The autumn wind in front of him suddenly froze into a thin layer of snow and rustled down. A door vaguely appeared in the middle of it. It was a passage hidden in the turbulence of the aura of heaven and earth. It was a pass that only those in the limitless realm could see. The Taoist in green's right foot stepped into the door and immediately turned into nothingness. In the eyes of countless people in front of the verdant canyon, he seemed to have broken through the void. Hundreds of thousands of people from the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army saw this miraculous scene and were shocked speechless. At this moment, a sword appeared in his right hand, which he had casually waved backwards. A sword condensed from air. The sword had already left his hand and pierced the thatched roof in front of the verdant canyon, which was covered with broken arrows. After the Taoist in indigo appeared, the verdant canyon became very quiet. The quietest person was second brother. He silently lowered his head and looked at the stone a foot and a half in front of him. He did not look at the Taoist in indigo because he wanted to maintain his full fighting spirit and confidence. He also did not look at the iron sword in his hand because a sword was not meant to be looked at. After the Taoist in indigo threw out the flying sword, second brother moved. He suddenly looked up and stared at the flying sword condensed from air. The iron sword in his hand trembled slightly. Could this iron sword, which had killed thousands of soldiers and horses, block this seemingly simple virtual sword? No one knew the answer. Because the virtual sword displayed by the Taoist in indigo suddenly became real nothingness in front of Jun Amo. It quietly passed through the area where he was and returned to reality behind him, continuing to stab under the awning. This method seemed to make the Taoist sword enter the limitless state. It was really incredible. In the face of such an unfathomable flying sword, second brother did not show any shock or fear on his face. Instead, he slightly frowned and looked down on the opponent. This virtual sword was indeed clever and the choice was indeed accurate. Since it was a sloppy sword before leaving, of course, the Taoist in indigo had to ensure that his sword could create the greatest lethality. Because this sword was a little sloppy, the Taoist in indigo let second brother go. In a sense, this was a respect for second brother. But in second brother's view, this was ridiculous. With the identity and state of the Taoist in indigo, he actually had to think about dealing with the disciples of the academy. It was really vulgar. So he looked down on this person. Even if his state was far above mine, even if he was the Abbey Dean of the Jisho Abbey, even if he was the highest peak in the cultivation world after the teacher ascended to heaven, he still looked down on him. No matter how powerful a person was, as long as he had a vulgar aura, second brother would not take him seriously. Of course, this did not mean more. Second brother knew how terrifying the power of the virtual sword was. He slightly raised his sword-like eyebrows. He looked down on the Taoist in indigo because he did not see through the tactical array in the iron shelter. Although the virtual sword had let him go, once it entered the shelter, he would be the one to bear the sword style. Because there was a red thread tied under his feet. The other end of the red thread was under the shelter, connected to all the junior brothers and sisters. He was ready to bear the virtual sword. He was ready to be injured. Seriously injured. But he was not ready to die. Because if he died, the verdant canyon would not be able to be defended. The broken arrows on the iron shelter were disturbed by the chi of heaven and earth carried by the virtual sword. They flowed down from the eaves like falling sand, like a waterfall of arrows. Inside the waterfall, seventh sister Muyu was pale. She held the red thread tightly in her hand and pulled it hard. Looking at the back of the man outside the shelter, her fingers trembled violently. Second brother would bear all the physical attacks that she, her fellow disciples, and the iron shelter suffered. However, this time the opponent was not a disciple of the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom, but the godlike Abbey Dean of the Jisho Abbey. Could senior brother bear it? How badly would he be injured? Would he be okay? Suddenly, she saw a shocking scene from the corner of her eyes. The red line buried in the sand had been quietly cut off by someone. Fourth brother's fingers had just left his ankle. There was another red thread tied to his ankle. The red thread was originally connected to second brother, but now it was tied to his ankle. This meant that he would be the one to bear the virtual sword of the Taoist in indigo. This tactical array was originally designed by fourth brother and herself, and finally modified by eldest brother. Muyu knew that there would be no problem with fourth brother's changes at this time. However, fourth brother was only at the see-through realm. How could he withstand a blow from the Abbey Dean? Before Muyu could scream, the virtual sword had arrived. The faint shadow of the sword seemed to have gone beyond the scope of speed. When it entered the iron shelter in front of the verdant canyon, its speed suddenly slowed down and became visible to the naked eye. The tactical array under the iron shelter was activated, and the red thread tied to the feet of all the academy disciples began to shake violently. Countless fine and tough auras were produced. The virtual sword was bound by countless auras and suddenly slowed down. It was like the sly sword of Lu Yiqing, a knowing destiny state powerhouse from the Sword Garret. However, the gap between the Abbey Dean of the Jisho Abbey and Lu Yiqing was like heaven and earth. This seemingly random virtual sword was tens of thousands of times stronger than Lu Yiqing's sly sword. There was a tearing sound. That illusory sword broke through all the threads of aura like it was breaking dry weeds and rotten wood. Then, it pierced deeply into the yellow sand. The yellow sand was very fine. It was whiter than the fine sand by the sea and finer than the gravel by the river. It was extremely soft. Although there was sand in the field before the verdant canyon, it was absolutely impossible to find this kind of yellow sand. This kind of yellow sand could only be found in one place. In the sand table where fourth brother was always with him. The virtual sword pierced into the sand table. Fourth brother's face suddenly turned pale. He held the sand table high in front of him, and his hands trembled violently. This seemingly inconspicuous sand table had actually blocked the virtual sword of the Taoist in indigo. The virtual sword disappeared in the sand table and into the yellow sand. The yellow sand danced, and there were several big rivers. The yellow sand gradually fell, and there were steep mountains and rivers. Each sand was a world, and there was a world in the sand table. It was a very magnificent river and mountain. The illusory sword danced in the seemingly boundless rivers and mountains. Because of its magnificence and grandeur, it was difficult for the virtual sword to touch anything. Therefore, the horrible power of the virtual sword could not be released. The sword flew in the sand table, over the mountains and rivers, and the fields and sky. The sword flew very lonely. The figure of the Taoist in indigo was about to disappear in the void. He was about to go from the verdant canyon to the next place. He did not care about the outcome of the virtual sword. Because he was very sure that even if Jun Mo took that sword, he would inevitably be seriously injured. The disciples of the academy could no longer guard the verdant canyon. At this moment, he suddenly let out a soft sound. This sound showed that he was a little surprised. The thin snow gradually fell, and the passage of the aura of heaven and earth was closed. The Taoist in indigo disappeared from the field. The words he said before he left were still echoing in the air. It's the river and mountain sandbox. The river and mountain sandbox was something in the ancient legend of the diviner Taoism. In the Kaiyuan period of the Tang dynasty, the river and mountain sandbox was lost without a trace, and the river and mountain sandbox deduction algorithm was also lost. Not many people knew that less than 40 years later, Ing Shanren, the seventh founder of the Black Ink Garden in the Great River Kingdom, and Elder Dawn Wind Nun, a famous mathematics professor of the academy, worked together for 6 years and recreated the river and mountain sandbox. Later, the two sages spent their whole lives recasting the river and mountain sandbox. After that, the river and mountain sandbox had been left in the back of the mountain of the academy. As time went by, it was gradually forgotten by the whole cultivation world. Even the master of calligraphy of the Black Ink Garden did not know this secret. Many years ago, when the headmaster traveled around the countries to find the exit of the underworld or to look for delicious food, he met a young apprentice in a pawn shop outside the wetland of Yinluan town. The headmaster watched the young apprentice for a long time because he felt that the young apprentice's abacus was very beautiful and the sound of it was very pleasant. The young apprentice was called Fan Yu, and later became the fourth prodisciple of the headmaster. The headmaster naturally gave him the river and mountain sandbox. Now, except for the people in the back of the mountain of the academy, only Mo Shanshan knew about it. The Taoist in indigo left. His virtual sword was still there. It was still flying in the river and mountain sandbox. The fourth brother held the sandbox, and his face became paler and paler. Blood gradually flowed from his lips. The second brother returned to the tent. Muyu looked at him and asked in a trembling voice, "What should we do?" The second brother was silent for a long time and said, "I don't know." The sixth brother said, "I'll smash the sandbox with a hammer." The fourth brother used all his psyche power, especially his spirit connected with the river and mountain sandbox to trap the virtual sword. He was too weak to speak, but he was furious when he heard the second brother's words. "You can smash me to death first." He stared at the sixth brother angrily and kept coughing up blood as he spoke. The sixth brother put down the iron hammer helplessly. Wang Qi looked at the fourth brother who was holding the sandbox and said worriedly, "Do you always hold it like this?" "Senior brother, if you are tired, I can do it for you. I have brewed the medicine for 2 days." The fourth brother listened to the younger brother's naive words and said with relief, "No, I can't let it go." As soon as he said this, there was a dead silence under the iron tent. He had lost so much blood in such a short time. How long could the fourth brother hold it? Even if he could hold it, could he hold it forever? The second brother looked at him and asked, will the sword stop by itself? The fourth brother shook his head and said, the river and mountain sandbox is a virtual realm, and the sword is a virtual sword. There is no air or external influence. Even if it stops, it will be hundreds of years later. The second brother asked again, what will happen if I let it go? The fourth brother was silent for a moment and said, it will explode. The second brother said, then let it explode. The fourth brother shook his head and said with a painful smile, I don't want the sixth brother to smash it, not because I don't want to let it go. Although it has been with me for so many years, it will explode as soon as I let it go. So even if you want it to explode, you have to let me go far away. Everyone was silent. Of course I know you don't want me to go far away and die alone. The fourth brother looked at them and said with a smile, so I will hold it as long as possible. The second brother turned to look at the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army in the south and said, don't worry, there is another way. What is it? Tell us, senior brother. Muyu asked anxiously. If the eldest brother can get rid of the Abbey Dean, he can solve this problem for you. What if he can't? Besides, the eldest brother doesn't know what happened here. Then we can kill the Abbey Dean. As long as he is dead or seriously injured, his sword will become a piece of scrap metal. The headmaster is gone. Who can kill the Abbey Dean now? To end this war, we have to kill him. So it's not a matter of who can kill him. Whether it is the Battle of Verdant Canyon or anything else, they are all preparations to kill him. The second brother said, Chang and has been waiting for him. I'm really tired today. I don't know why I'm tired. See you tomorrow. 2 chapters. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 759. There was a simple Taoist abbey in the deep forest. Behind the Taoist abbey was a bright lake. There were 7 thatched cottages by the lake, their roofs covered with golden and jade-like straws. A green robe suddenly appeared on the lake. The Abbey Dean appeared by the lake. There was a half-collapsed thatched cottage by the lake. Golden straws were everywhere, and a dark red book, ink, paper, and inkstone could be faintly seen under it. Seeing this, the Abbey Dean's face turned cold. A middle-aged Taoist stood under a bluestone by the lake with a horsetail whisk on his arm. His face was pale and solemn. He only relaxed a little when he saw the Abbey Dean. He said tiredly, greetings, senior brother. The Abbey Dean ignored him and looked at the half-collapsed thatched cottage in silence. There was a rustling sound. Eldest brother crawled out from under the grass. His hair and cotton-padded jacket were stuck with grass. There was blood at the corner of his mouth. He looked a little embarrassed. He must have been injured when fighting with the middle-aged Taoist. Few people in the cultivation world knew about the existence of the middle-aged Taoist. But it did not mean that he was not powerful. Many years ago, the headmaster used a wooden stick to force him to stay away from the land. He only dared to drift in the South Sea. From that day on, everything in the Jishou Abbey was handled by the middle-aged Taoist. The middle-aged Taoist was the second most powerful person in the Jishou Abbey. He lived in seclusion, but once he made a move, it would be earth-shattering. That was why eldest brother was injured. The Abbey Dean looked at eldest brother in the thatched cottage and said, you knew that younger brother was guarding the Taoist Abbey. But you came here deliberately. I think it is not wise. Eldest brother replied, since the Abbey Dean has chased me all the way here, it means that my choice is correct. The Abbey Dean suddenly asked, have you been to the Jishou Abbey? Eldest brother shook his head calmly. The Abbey Dean frowned slightly and asked, then how did you mark the location of the Jishou Abbey in your sense of perception? The headmaster knew the location of the Jishou Abbey. Eldest brother raised his right hand and pointed at his forehead with his index finger. He said with a smile, then he told me. The Abbey Dean said, "You have been traveling around the world for the past 2 days, but never came here. You must have been waiting for that moment." Eldest brother said, "That's right. Because that is the only way I could buy some time in the Verdant Canyon." "Abbey Dean, you have to leave with me immediately." The Abbey Dean said, "I left a sword at the Verdant Canyon." After a moment of silence, the eldest brother said, "I trust them." The Abbey Dean asked, "Why are you so sure that I will leave the Verdant Canyon with you?" "Because I came to the Jishou Abbey. You have to follow me to the Jishou Abbey. You can't be any slower." The eldest brother said calmly, "Before that, my junior brothers and I had been thinking about what could be more important to you than destroying the Tang Empire and the Academy. We thought about it for a long time, but we couldn't think of a suitable answer." The Abbey Dean and the middle-aged priest were silent. Eldest brother looked at the ink-red ancient book buried in the straw in front of him and said with a smile, "Later, we finally realized that, for you, your faith in Haotian, or rather, your reverence for it, is greater than countless in the human world. The Tomes of Arcane is a sacred object given by Haotian to Haotian Taoism. 2 volumes have been lost for thousands of years. Haotian will naturally be unhappy. If I take away the remaining 5 volumes, it will be interesting whether I destroy them or hide them. So, you have to follow me here." The Abbey Dean said after a moment of silence, "Since you are here, you don't have to leave." Eldest brother said, "I am an unwelcome guest. It's better for me to leave as soon as possible." The Abbey Dean looked at him and said calmly, "The rain doesn't keep the guest, but I am here to keep the guest. You have to know that this is the Jishou Abbey, not the back of the mountain of the Academy. You risked your life to come here. What's the difference between you and a bird walking into a trap?" The meaning of this sentence was clear. It was not a threat, but a calm and simple explanation. No one would doubt that in the unknown place, the Jishou Abbey was the simplest. However, Haotian Taoism ruled the world. As the existence above the clouds of Haotian Taoism, the Jishou Abbey must have very powerful, or even unimaginably powerful means. Eldest brother was very clear about this, but he looked calm. Since he dared to come, he had already prepared his means. The Abbey Dean waved his sleeves and clouds came out. Between the green mountains and the lake, the aura of heaven and earth suddenly closed. The clear and beautiful autumn sun could not fall. The autumn wind could only pass through the ruined forest behind the Taoist Abbey, but could not pass through the walls of the Taoist Abbey. The big array of the Jishou Abbey was activated. The Taoist Abbey became an independent existence in the Haotian world, but closely related to the Haotian world. No one could leave this small world. Not even the limitless state. Because the aura of heaven and earth in the Jishou Abbey had been completely separated from the aura of heaven and earth around. If eldest brother wanted to leave with the limitless state, he would run into the dense boundary. But he still left, leaving leisurely. His cotton-padded jacket fluttered, and eldest brother's figure suddenly faded and disappeared in the autumn wind by the lake. There was dead silence by the lake. The Abbey Dean looked at the middle-aged Taoist with a cold expression. In these years, the Jishou Abbey had been managed by the middle-aged Taoist. Long Qing could escape from the Taoist Abbey because he followed the Abbey Dean's wishes and deliberately indulged himself. But what was going on now? The middle-aged Taoist's expression became a little gloomy. He sighed and said, "He came back." The Abbey Dean flicked his sleeves and disappeared into the void, leaving 2 extremely cold words. Unfilial son. No one knew what had happened in the Jishou Abbey. The field in front of the verdant canyon was quiet. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army had sounded the gongs to retreat. Today, the Divine Hall was about to win a decisive victory. No one had expected that eldest brother of the Academy would appear on the battlefield and turn the whole situation around with a string and a stick. Although the Abbey Dean's appearance had injected confidence and fanaticism into the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, unexpectedly, the Abbey Dean had disappeared. There seemed to be no change in front of the verdant canyon. The coalition army had suffered a series of setbacks. Their own strength was not the main thing. The key was the burning divine chariot, the cavalry corpses all over the ground, and the unbreakable exit of the verdant canyon, which made the soldiers' morale abnormally low. Although they were not desperate, they began to feel tired. Now that the great divine priest of revelation was seriously injured, and the divine chariot was burned and blown into countless flying ashes by the autumn wind, the morale of the army was gradually unstable. Yi Hongyu immediately decided to withdraw the troops in advance. It was still early. The night gradually fell. The porridge pot under the iron canopy at the exit of the verdant canyon was only left with the bottom of the pot. The fragrance of porridge had already spread to the field, without a trace left. The people of the academy were very quiet, which was completely different from last night when they were high-spirited, talking and killing people. Although only 2 days had passed, they were already very tired. Fourth brother held the river and mountain sandbox and coughed from time to time. The front of the academy uniform was full of mottled blood stains. Wang Qi squatted beside him with a medicine bowl and was thinking of ways to feed him medicine. Beigong Weiyang and Shimen Buhua were injured by the teachings. Fortunately, they took medicine in time and were treated by eldest brother. Their injuries had stabilized and their spirits were much better. In fact, second brother was the most tired person. His expression was still so calm, and his sitting posture was still so upright. But everyone could imagine how tired he was at this time. Go to bed early. Second brother looked at the coalition tents in the southern field. Looking at the dense lights that were even brighter than the stars in the sky, he said after a moment of silence, "Tomorrow should be more difficult." The younger brothers and sisters responded, but no one went to sleep. They still sat around fourth brother. At this time, the virtual sword left by the Abbey Dean was still flying in the river and mountain sandbox. Fourth brother had to use his own psyche power to launch the river and mountain sandbox to trap the virtual sword in the yellow sand. He could not put down the sandbox, nor could he rest. He could only endure the pain. No one knew how long he would last, or whether he could make it to the end. Second brother walked behind him and sat down. Since he came to the verdant canyon, he had not taken off his armor. Therefore, when he sat down, the sound of the iron armor hitting against each other was extremely clear, firm and stern. Just like what he said later. It's always easier to lean on each other. Fourth brother smiled slightly, leaned back tiredly, and then slowly closed his eyes. Second brother passed the iron sword from his shoulder to the back and put it under his forearm. There was a bright moon in the night sky. The moon was relatively dark, so the stars in the night sky could be seen clearly. Yi Hongyu looked at the night sky quietly, with no expression on her face. The great divine priest of revelation had been sent back to the West Hill Divine Palace, but no one knew if he could survive. If Mr. First's rod was aimed at her, how should she deal with it? She thought for a long time and finally came to the conclusion that she could not deal with it. But she was not discouraged, nor did she feel defeated. She had never been that kind of person. She was never the most powerful person. But it turned out that she could always defeat enemies who were stronger than her in the end. At this time, she was thinking more about something else. The more she thought about it, the more she frowned. She thought about it for a whole night. Until dawn. The morning light gradually brightened, and the wilderness was covered with mist. No one knew whether it would be sunny or cloudy today. Everyone in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was waiting for one person to make a move. Because only that person could defeat the iron sword in front of the verdant canyon. And everyone firmly believed that as long as that person made a move, he would definitely win. However, Lu Bai still did not make a move. Even the disciples of the sword Garrett began to feel doubtful and puzzled. Yi Hongyu looked at the quiet horse carriage with a hint of sarcasm in her eyes. She respected the sage of sword Lu Bai very much. Because of the paper sword in the letter, Lu Bai was even half a teacher to her. But she still felt that Lu Bai was a very stupid person. In her eyes, all pride and self-esteem were stupid. No matter how much pride a person had, it was the same. no matter whether that person was the Abbey Dean or Lu Bai. In this battle of the Verdant Canyon, if the real powerhouses in Haotian Taoism could listen to her command, she had countless ways to directly crush the people of the academy in front of the Verdant Canyon. If Lu Bai was willing to give up his pride in sword Taoism and cooperate with the cavalry to besiege them, who in the world could resist? If the Abbey Dean was willing to step into the mortal world, how could the academy be a match for Haotian Taoism? The problem was that although she was now the great divine priest of West Hill and was like a god in the hearts of the believers, there were always a few people in the world that she could not influence or control. The Abbey Dean and Lu Bai were such people. Last night, she looked at the moon and did not sleep. She suddenly thought of Ning Quebec. She and Ning K were the real kindred spirits. Only she and he understood that unscrupulous means were the best means. At this moment, a Buddhist chant came from the thin mist. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 760. The Mute Speaks. Put some salt on the pancake. The Buddhist chant came from the mist. A figure slowly walked out of the mist. It was a man who wore plain clothes but had his hair combed into a Taoist bun. A thin wooden sword floated above his head and quietly broke through the mist. It was Yi Su, the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, and his sword. Second brother slowly stood up. He and fourth brother had been sitting back to back for the whole night. He had not slept all night, so he could not hide the tiredness in his eyes. Hearing the Buddhist chant from the mist, the people of the academy were vigilant and even a little nervous. Put more salt on the pancake. Second brother said to Muyu, who was baking pancakes by the stove, it seems that he has a heavy taste. It was a joke that was not funny. However, he never told jokes, so it was very funny. Everyone burst out laughing. Then there was silence. Second brother began to tell jokes, which made everyone feel a little uneasy. Yi Su asked, "What is so funny?" Second brother said, "You are the only one who appeared. Of course, you are the funniest." Yi Su said, "It seems that you are not surprised by my appearance." Second brother said, "The Abbey Dean came yesterday. There is no need to care about one more fly." Yi Su said, "I wanted to fight with you in Chang'an." Second brother said, "If senior brother did not allow it, I would have gone to find you with my sword when you saw through the small Taoist temple in Chang'an." Yi Su said, "Killing is done with a sword." Second brother raised the iron sword in his hand and said, "I will not say such nonsense as the sword is already here." Yi Su asked with a smile, "Then what are you going to say?" Second brother said, "What I want to say is that you appeared at a very bad time. It is very bad for you." "Why?" Yi Su stopped smiling and asked calmly. Second brother said, "I have killed hundreds of people in the past 2 days. My sword is at its peak. Lu Bai has been waiting for you to kill until you are really excited. I don't want to wait any longer." Yi Su said, "Because at that time, it might be the worst time." Then he suddenly frowned and said, "Jun Mo, you are in a bad state now." Second brother's answer was calm and serious. "I haven't slept for a whole night. Naturally, I'm not feeling well." Yi Su said, "Do you want to sleep for a while?" Second brother said, "No need." Yi Su raised his brows and asked, "Why?" Second brother said, "Because you are not Lu Bai yet. You are not Lu Bai. You may become Lu Bai, but you are not Lu Bai yet. Even if I don't sleep for the whole night, I have the confidence to defeat you." This was what second senior brother wanted to convey. The ordinary soldiers of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army did not know who that person was. Some of the more senior divine officials in the temple guessed the identity of the person in the fog, and the joy on their faces was difficult to suppress. But Yi Hongyu frowned slightly. She had once regarded that person as her idol and the goal of her cultivation. However, in her eyes, that person was also an idiot. Just like the Abidine and Lu Bai. Because they had cultivated for a long time, they were too arrogant and didn't want to eat the food of the mortal world. That was why they had a pure heart and few desires. They were all experts. Even the saints. But not the person who would obtain the final victory. On the battlefield of life and death, there was no room for arrogance, nor was there a need for elegance. At this moment, she thought of Ning Ke again. She did not know who would be the winner if they were both alive many years later. Ning Ke did not know that Yi Hongyu, the contemporary great divine priest of judgment, had such a high evaluation or expectation of him. At this moment, all his attention was on the ground in front of him. On the wide granite ground, there were countless three-dimensional shapes made of light mist and lines. Inside the thick city wall, there was the knee-high Wanyan Tower and the scale-like market. This was the miniature Chang and city, and it was the god-stunning array. Ning Ke sat cross-legged outside Chang and city, silently and attentively observing. He had been observing for a whole day and night. He had already seen the problem. Chang and city was blocked. It was not the wide Vermilion Bird Avenue blocked by horse carriages, nor the streets and alleys in the eastern city blocked by stalls, nor the underground sewer blocked by silt. It was not a real blockage. It was the circulation of the qi of heaven and earth in this magnificent city that was not smooth. Ning Ke could see with his naked eyes that the light mist in more than 10 places in Chang and city in front of him was obviously disturbed and condensed into a mess. Chang and city was a tactical array. A big tactical array that could shock the gods. The power of this big tactical array came from the qi of heaven and earth flowing in Chang and city. 1,000 years ago, when Chang and city was first built, the headmaster of the academy used his supreme wisdom to build palaces in the city and drew the qi of heaven and earth into the city to set up this big tactical array that could repair itself and circulate endlessly. In the years that followed, the qi of heaven and earth that should have flowed freely blew in Chang and city like a breeze. It was still free, but it began to have its own rules. These rules were the origin of the god-stunning array. Time was the most ruthless and powerful weapon. Although the god-stunning array could repair itself, it still needed the people in the city to maintain it in its best state. The Tang Imperial Court had a special fund to do this, and the most important task of the Clear Water Bureau of the Ministry of Works was to dredge the natural waterways and lakes in Chang and city. The cleaning of Yanming Lake seemed to be a civil project on the surface, but it was actually a routine maintenance of the god-stunning array. But of course, the god-stunning array would not lose its power just because of some changes in buildings or terrain. In fact, even if the Imperial Court had never done maintenance, this should not have happened. Ning Ke got up and walked into Chang and city that was condensed by the light mist. He crossed Yanming Mountain and came to the knee-high Imperial City. He bent down and grabbed the array pestle that was stuck in the ground and pulled it out. With this action, Chang and city on the granite ground gradually turned into a thick light mist. Then, it condensed into a water-like light liquid and slowly seeped down along the carvings on the ground. The array pestle in his hand gradually darkened, and the complicated patterns and the pestle body merged into one. Ning Ke left the palace and came to the city wall. He looked at Chang and city under the city wall and was silent for a long time. The chaos in Chang and city had subsided, and life gradually returned to normal. There were more and more horse carriages on the streets. The pedestrians looked calm, but most of them were in a hurry. The Tang Empire had been fully mobilized, and the Tangs were focused on doing their own things. They knew very well that this was the best way to support the soldiers who were fighting in the front line. Ning Ke had not slept for a long time. He was very tired and his eyes were a little dry. He closed his eyes and began to feel the city. He seemed to see the calm and determined hearts of the Tangs. At the same time, he saw more than 10 blockages in the aura of heaven and earth. When all the Tangs regained their confidence and courage, he saw the crisis of Chang and city. He was anxious. He could not sleep at night. This chapter is 2000. So, the 2 chapters tomorrow will be 7000. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 761. Chang'an was said to be impregnable. In fact, it had never been. To be more precise, it had never been tested since the founding of the Tang Empire. But no one doubted it, because Chang'an was the last and strongest source of confidence for the Tangs. As long as the city stood on the plains south of the Sisui River, the Tangs would always be smiling. Besieging the city was also not advisable. As long as Chang'an was still there, the resistance of the Tang Empire, especially the areas near the capital, would not stop. The Tang's spirit of resistance and determination to fight to the last moment would continue. For the Tangs, Chang'an would never fall was a psychological stereotype. It was almost a truth and did not need a reason. Not many people knew that the fundamental reason was a big array called the God-stunning array. That was a fact only those who stood at the top of the cultivation world knew. Now there was a problem with the God-stunning array, and Chang'an was not as indestructible as it had been for 1,000 years. What if an army came and powerful cultivators entered the city? Only a few people knew about this problem, including Ning Quebec. Looking down at the densely packed residences and streets that extended in all directions, his brows were filled with exhaustion and worry. He held a charcoal pen and kept drawing on the map. Looking at the places in the city that were blocked, he thought about ways to repair or unblock them. But the more he thought, the more he looked terrible. Third Sister had given him 7 days. Now more than 2 days had passed, but he had not come up with a good solution. Instead, he noticed that the situation of the big array was getting worse. Starting from the Daming Palace outside the North City, the dark water hidden in the autumn forest flowed out of the curved mountain, converged at the lake, passed the Southern Gate Temple, passed the Wanyan Tower, entered the Vermilion Bird Avenue, and came out from the south gate of Chang'an. All the blockages happened on this dark line. In the God-stunning array, this dark line was very important. It was called breath, and it was the key passage for the cycle of life and death. He had long discovered and removed the tricks that Haotian Taoism did at the bottom of the small building in the palace. But the interference of the God-stunning array was irreversible. As time went by, it became worse and worse. He thought for a long time but still could not come up with a solution. If the blockage had been a natural landscape or a constructed street, it wouldn't have been much of a problem. Given the Great Tang's formidable administrative and mobilization abilities, even a small mountain would be hollowed out in 7 days. The problem was that the method of the Tao sect was directly used in the array pivot under the small building, causing the operation of the chi of heaven and earth in the array to be disturbed. Several chi holes were blocked, directly affecting the entire array. At this moment, the south gate under his feet was affected the most. Ning Ke did not understand how he Ming Chi could enter the small building without the array eye pestle. He also could not understand how Haotian Taoism could calculate the God-stunning array so clearly. Now that he thought about it, he could only say that the Tao sect had made ample preparations for this moment. Haotian Taoism had prepared for thousands of years and gathered the wisdom and ability of countless Haotian Taoism sages. Even though they were not as good as the headmaster and could not directly destroy the God-stunning array, they still successfully interfered with the operation of the God-stunning array. It was extremely tough and irreversible. Ning Ke had eliminated all the sources of interference that Haotian Taoism had placed in Chang'an, but he could not repair the blockage of the array because it would require an unimaginable amount of chi of heaven and earth. In fact, this level of damage or interference could be repaired by the God-stunning array itself, but it would take a long time, 2 or 3 years. In times of peace, this was not a big deal. The problem was that now was the time of the world war against the Tang Empire. The enemy would not give the Tangs such a long time. If the headmaster had not ascended to heaven, this would be a very simple matter. He only needed to wave his sleeves to summon the chi of heaven and earth from the continent and under the sea of clouds to Chang'an. But the headmaster no longer existed in the world. In today's world, no one could use such a method. In that case, Was there really no way to repair this formation? Would Chang'an be opened? The array pestle was in Ning Kei's arms. It was as hard as a stone, which made him feel a little flustered. This city was left to him by the headmaster, and the array pestle was left to him by Master Yen Sei and His Majesty. This meant that protecting Chang'an and the Tang Empire was an inescapable responsibility. This was the supreme glory, but also the heaviest burden in the world. But the most ridiculous thing was that Ning Kei was not an array tactical master. Master Yen Sei once said that the array was a big talisman, and the talisman was a small array. There had always been a saying in the cultivation world that an array tactical master might not be able to become a talisman master, but a talisman master must be a very good array tactical master. Ning Kei was a very talented talisman master, but for some reason, his talent in array tactical was terrible. When he first entered the back mountain of the academy, he helped Seventh Sister set up the array for many days, but he did not make any progress. These years, he studied hard to control the god-stunning array, but he also did not make any progress. Now that fourth brother and seventh sister were not in the academy, he did not know where to ask. So he became more and more anxious, and his shoulders were about to collapse from the heavy burden. The autumn wind blew on his face, making him feel cold. After a moment of silence, he walked down the city wall. The south gate of Chang'an, facing the Vermilion Bird Avenue, had been heavily guarded since the war began. At his request, the imperial court transferred all the last Yulin royal guards in the city here. More than 100 Yulin royal guards in shiny armor were waiting in the side street with serious expressions, and the atmosphere was even more solemn. Dozens of members of the Fish Dragon gang in indigo clothes were vigilantly watching people entering and leaving the city under the eaves. The troops around Chang'an had been transferred to the northern borderline, leaving the city defenseless. The imperial court was forced to use the power of the people. The sergeants of the city defense department carefully checked the teams entering and leaving the city, and each document was checked by 3 people in turn, to ensure that there were no spies or contraband. This kind of inspection was very complicated, and the workload was very heavy. Fortunately, there were very few people entering and leaving Chang'an at this time. Only the endless supply of grain caravans occupied the official road outside the city. These were all the grain transported from various states and counties. The Tang Empire was ready for Chang'an to be besieged. But no one began to prepare for Chang'an to be breached, not even psychologically prepared. Looking at this scene, Ning Kei's mood became heavier. At this moment, a woman walked out of the city gate. The woman's eyebrows were like ink, her eyes like lacquer, and her face was picturesque. Her lips were a little thin, and they were calmly closed. On her white face, it was like a winter sweet in the snow. Her straight black hair was scattered on her shoulders, no longer like a waterfall in the past, but like a beautiful brush stroke. Ning Kei looked at her quietly, and suddenly looked up to the sky. The late autumn sky was high and distant, and extremely light. He suddenly felt that Haotian. No, it should be the teacher in heaven, felt his anxiety and uneasiness at this time, so he sent her to Chang'an, to him. Then he withdrew his gaze from the sky, looked at the picturesque woman, and smiled. Why did you come to Chang'an? I wanted to come, so I came. Mo Shanshan replied with a smile, and her white cotton dress was slightly blown by the autumn wind passing through the city gate. Ning Kei thought of a question, and said, Black Ink Garden. Mo Shanshan knew what he was going to ask, and before he finished, she said calmly, I have left. Ning Kei did not expect to hear this answer, but in fact, he knew that this was the only answer. If Mo Shanshan did not want to implicate Black Ink Garden, her teacher and fellow disciples, and even the Great River Kingdom, then she had to break away from the sect to come to Chang'an and stand against the Westhill Divine Palace. After a moment of silence, he reached out his right hand and invited her to enter the city. Ning Kei and Mo Shanshan walked in Chang'an. They walked side by side again, just like in the past. But in fact, it was not like before. The two came to the front of the palace, and came to the bridge of the past. They looked at the same vermilion palace wall, but there was no snowflake flying in the sky, only yellow ginkgo leaves covering the ground. I don't have time, or we can travel together again. Ning Kei reached out to the water outside the bridge, and caught a falling ginkgo leaf in the air. He said, "This is the fourth blockage. Feel the aura of heaven and earth directly under the arrow tower." Mo Shanshan closed her eyes, and her sparse and long eyelashes trembled slightly on her white skin. After a moment, she opened her eyes, and the emotions in her eyes were a little complicated, shocked and uneasy. What a powerful tactical array! Ning Kei withdrew his hand, and the ginkgo leaf fell into the moat under the bridge. The river flowed very slowly, and at this time the surface of the river was already full of beautiful yellow leaves. With the addition of this leaf, no change could be seen at all. He looked at the yellow leaves on the moat and said, "It is because it is powerful that it is troublesome. Now that it has been blocked by Haotian Taoism, to unblock it, we need more qi of heaven and earth." After thinking for a moment, Mo Shanshan shook her head and said, "No one can summon such a large amount of qi of heaven and earth, and no one can set up a tactical array that can repair this big tactical array." Ning Kei asked, "Can we use talismans?" Mo Shanshan said, "If the tactical array is a talisman, then this big tactical array is the most powerful talisman I have ever seen in my life. It can even be said to be a real divine talisman." Ning Kei understood what she meant. Chang'an was a huge city, and the wisdom of the headmaster of academy was a steep mountain that was difficult to climb. Haotian Taoism's method seemed simple, but the use of these 2 points was secretly in accordance with the law of nature. He said, "I hope you can solve this problem." Mo Shanshan said, "I don't have this ability." Ning Kei said, "You are better than me." Mo Shanshan said, "Then you can give me the array I pestle." Ning Kei shook his head. Mo Shanshan said with a smile, "I thought you have learned to trust after experiencing so many things." Ning Kei thought of the dark-skinned girl on the Sisui River, whose feet were as white as snow lotuses. The one who stepped on the light and lived in the dark. He said, "I am sorry, except for the academy, even if Li Sanyang came back to life, I still can't trust her completely." Mo Shanshan asked, "Who is Li Sanyang?" Ning Kei said, "My mother." Mo Shanshan said after a moment of silence, "I am sorry." Long Qing also enthusiastically recommended Bean's new book, Ascending Evil. "I really don't understand the title of this book. Moving Mountains is so wonderful. I'm guessing that it's about immortal ascension and then changing immortal into something else. Anyway, I'm enthusiastically recommending it. The quality is guaranteed. The book number is 2572738. Also, Shanshan celebrated her birthday a few days ago. I just happened to stop updating on that day. There's one more chapter today. Also, I won't be resting tomorrow on Saturday. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 762. The ginkgo leaves fell all over the ground, just like those words. The two stood on the bridge and were silent for a while. Ning Kei said, "You are eldest brother's sworn sister and my friend. The master of calligrapher asked you to leave Mogan Mountain because he knows that helping the Tang Empire is helping the big river. No matter what, you have to work hard." Mo Shanshan was a little confused and asked, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to have a good sleep." Ning Kei said, "I am not eldest brother or second brother. I will die if I don't sleep. I want to vomit after looking at this city for 2 days. I need to relax." Mo Shanshan said, "Then go rest. But please don't feel frustrated and run away. Think about why you sat by the lake for half a day when Monk Guanhai challenged you." Ning Kei recalled the past and smiled. Next, he drew a very detailed map for Mo Shanshan and explained the god-stunning array. Then he irresponsibly left her and walked to Spring Breeze Pavilion in the eastern city. He did not really go to sleep, nor did he go to Yanming Lake in a daze. The court had just calmed down and Li Yu was still under house arrest in the princess mansion. Many ministers were still against Ning Ke and even strongly disliked him, so he could not be too close to the palace. Now he needed to know the arrangements of the court and communicate with the empress through the Chao mansion in Spring Breeze Pavilion. In the Chao mansion, he received the latest military orders and military intelligence from various states. Looking at the military intelligence briefs, his expression became serious. The southern battlefront army was still on the way. The Western Army and the Yueluan Kingdom in the Pamir Mountains had not reported back yet. The Northern Battlefront Army, shouldering the most difficult task, was struggling under the attack of the cavalry of the Golden Palace. Even though the Northern Battlefront Army's numbers were reduced, it was not easy to reverse the situation. Now the most troublesome situation was the war in the east and south, especially in the south. The West Hill Divine Palace led hundreds of thousands of troops north from Qinghe Prefecture. Sitting in Chang'an, Ning Ke seemed to be able to see the scene of flags waving all over the sky. He could not imagine what he would do if they attacked Chang'an. His senior brothers and sisters in the back mountain should be in the verdant canyon now. Were they all right? Would they be able to hold on? How many days could they hold on? At this moment, the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an, Shangguan Yangyu, and Qi For came to the Chao mansion. Ning Ke wanted to see them. The chaos in Chang'an has been quelled so quickly. Your Excellency, you have done a great job. Ning Ke looked at the wretched prefectural magistrate and said sincerely. Old Master Chao passed by the door with a cat in his arms. Hearing this, he looked at Shangguan Yangyu, who was bending down, and said, "This lord likes to be humble." Ning Ke said with a smile, "You're right." He waved at old Master Chao, rubbed the cat's belly, and left. Shangguan Yangyu said charmingly, "Not at all. It's all thanks to Her Majesty and Mr. 13th's good command." Ning Ke said, "At that time, the Empress and I were still outside the city. How could we command you?" Shangguan Yangyu said seriously, "When the person is gone, the righteousness lives on." "I can feel it." Ning Ke waved his hand and said, "Forget it. I'm not a grand secretary and I'm not used to hearing such words. There are few officials in the Tang officialdom who would speak like you. Let's save some time and get straight to the point." Shangguan Yangyu cleared his throat and said directly, "He Mingqi should have escaped from the Dongyang Gate. The City Gate Department is investigating internally and has arrested more than a dozen suspects. The Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple have become much more well-behaved. Those who escaped from the Qinghe County Club have all been arrested and are now temporarily detained in the club." Ning Ke was very clear that the reason why the Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple had become well-behaved had nothing to do with the exposure of He Mingqi's true identity. It was because the parents and relatives of those cultivators were now under house arrest by the Chang and local government and the Fish Dragon Gang. Under such circumstances, except for those who were truly cold-blooded, who would dare to make a move? The disciples of the Qinghe County families cannot escape the crime of treason. Although they have not been tried, why should they stay in the club and sleep comfortably? Send them all to the local government prison. Ning Ke said. Shangguan Yangyu seemed to be a little embarrassed and said, "The local government can't lock so many people." Ning Ke looked at Qi For and said, "The Fish Dragon Gang must have many dungeons." Mr. Qi shrugged and said, "It's not a problem to lock up a few hundred people." Ning Ke looked at the expression on Shangguan Yangyu's face and said, "What's the problem?" "I don't have any problem, but there are many officials in the imperial court. Maybe there will be problems." Shangguan Yangyu said, "There are two opinions in the imperial court about how to deal with the families of Qinghe County. One is to try them as soon as possible to give an explanation to the imperial court and the people. The other is to let the disciples of the family stay in Chang and city alive, so that they can be used as a bargaining chip when negotiating with the West Hill Divine Palace in the future." Ning Ke was silent for a moment and said, "These people must die." Shangguan Yangyu said worriedly, "What if the officials in the imperial court object? Even if we want to negotiate in the future, there are some problems that cannot be discussed. Ning Ke said, the problem of Qinghe County is a problem that cannot be discussed. Of course, it is indeed a pity for these people to die now, so let them suffer first. Qi For said, I am better at this. Shangguan Yangyu said, the prefectural government is more professional. Ning Ke said, you can discuss these small things yourself. I called you here today because the Empress has decided to hand over the City Gate Department and the temporary law enforcement power to His Excellency. The Fish Dragon Gang will also temporarily be under His Excellency's command. Mr. Qi, you have to cooperate with His Excellency and do this well. Shangguan Yangyu was very clear that as long as he could survive this war, he would definitely be promoted after the war. However, he did not expect that he would suddenly have such a great power. He could not help but feel a little excited and a little scared. Mr. Qi also felt a little strange. This arrangement was a little strange. Chang'an City is very empty. If the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, no matter which side the enemy is from, there is nothing we can do if they come to the city. So you have to be prepared in advance after the city is breached. Hearing Ning Ke's words, Shangguan Yangyu and Mr. Qi were shocked and speechless. Just like all the Tangs, they had never thought that Chang'an City would be breached one day. Don't spread this news. Ning Ke did not look at Qi For, but looked at Shangguan Yangyu's eyes. That pair of wretched triangular eyes flashed with a complicated look. Ning Ke looked at him and said calmly, if something goes wrong, there will be no Shangguan in the world. He said he wanted to rest, but how could he rest? How could he sleep with such a heavy stone in his heart? Ning Ke walked along the Vermilion Bird Avenue to the south gate. He felt the subtle changes in the aura of heaven and earth and observed the blocked areas along the way. He looked more and more tired and his footsteps became heavier. When he came to the city wall, he looked at the top of the city wall. The city wall of Chang'an was as high as a cliff. Standing on the ground, it was difficult to see the picture at the top. His eyesight was far sharper than that of ordinary people, so he could see the girl in the white cotton dress. She was looking at Chang'an City and thinking hard. Just like him before. Ning Ke thanked her silently. She can recognize the stone array tactics. This girl is indeed more talented than you in tactical arrays. But since the teacher has handed Chang'an City to you, I think you need to figure it out yourself. A little girl walked to his side and looked up at the city wall. The little girl was about 12 or 13 years old. Her black ponytails swayed at her waist. She looked young and cute, but her tone was calm, gentle and mature. It was not inappropriate to call Mo Shanshan a little girl. She was the current leader of the Devil's Doctrine, so she was qualified to call the calligraphy addict a little girl. Senior sister, I really can't think of any way. Ning Ke said. Yu Lian looked at him and said, so you have already started to plan to break the city. Ning Ke said, I don't think about winning, but about losing first. This is my habit. Yu Lian said, if it is a normal time, this is not a problem. But the situation now is that the Tang Empire will lose, so we must only think about winning, not about losing. Ning Ke did not understand. Yu Lian said, we can only think about how to win, but not how to face failure. But, if failure is destined, how can we win? Then we have to win before we lose. Yu Lian said, the final result of a war depends on many aspects. Maybe Second Brother can't defend the Verdant Canyon, maybe the Northern Battlefront Army will be defeated by the Golden Tribe, maybe Chang'an will be broken. But as long as we can win in one aspect before these failures come, we can prevent these failures from happening. Ning Ke understood and said, the most important thing is to win. Yes. Yu Lian said, in your opinion, what will be the outcome of this war? Ning Ke was very clear that the Tang Empire had suffered a series of setbacks at the beginning of the war. The gap between the two sides had widened. Even if the Verdant Canyon could be defended and the God-stunning array could be repaired, it would still be difficult to change the final outcome. We will probably still lose. He said, But I believe that when the Tang Empire is destroyed, there will not be many countries left in the world. Yes, this is the truth that everyone in the world can understand. The royal families and the generals of the various countries are stupid, but they should be able to understand this. Yu Lian said, the Tang Empire and the Academy have begun to show their power. People are dying everywhere. I believe the Yueluan Kingdom is in a miserable state in Chaoyang City. The Yan Kingdom has also crippled itself. Who would want to die with the Tang Empire? Ning Ke said, I heard that the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom is a little crazy because of the death of his son. Yu Lian said, if the Emperor wants to drag the entire South Jin Kingdom into the swamp of madness, the royal family and the generals will come out to stop him. Because there are more people who are not crazy. Only the West Hill Divine Palace wants to destroy the Tang Empire at all costs. She continued, Xiong Chumo has been crippled. The Divine Hall of Revelation and the Hall of Judgment will be seriously injured or even killed after the Battle of the Verdant Canyon. What else does the Divine Hall have? Ning Ke was deep in thought. A few days ago, eldest brother and I have been thinking about a problem. How to win in a certain defeat, at least a temporary victory and a temporary peace. Until we figured it out. Yu Lian looked at him and said, kill the Abbey Dean and this war will end. Ning Ke did not know what to say. This inference was correct. If the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey was killed by the Academy, the West Hill Divine Palace would suffer a great loss and its influence on the countries in the secular world would be weakened. Then, which country would be willing to be destroyed with the Tang Empire? More importantly, if the Abbey Dean died, Taoism would no longer have any restraints on the sword Garrett and Liu Bai. However, the problem was, the Abbey Dean was the most powerful and unfathomable powerhouse in the world after the headmaster of the Academy ascended to heaven. The difficulty of killing him was not much different from the Tang Empire winning this tragic war. Ning Ke looked at her and said, Senior sister, did you stay in Chang'an and not go to the Verdant Canyon because of this? Yu Lian said, I am not confident that I can defeat him. The Abbey Dean is more powerful than you and most people in the world can imagine. He is even more powerful than we can imagine. Ning Ke knew that eldest brother was competing with the Abbey Dean in the distanceless state. In his impression, the Abbey Dean was not worthy of his senior sister's description no matter how powerful he was. Yu Lian said, you will know when the Abbey Dean makes his move. Ning Ke said, what can I do? Yu Lian said, repair the city. Ning Ke finally completely understood what eldest brother and third sister meant. If Chang'an was destroyed, it would be a failure. If the Academy could kill the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey before Chang'an was destroyed, it would be a victory. When eldest brother brought the Abbey Dean to Chang'an, he needed to repair at least a part of the city. The part where he killed people. If he could not do that, he would not need to repair the city anymore. This was the last light of night before dawn. It could also be the last step before the abyss. Ning Ke felt more and more stressed, so much so that he had difficulty breathing. At night, Mo Shanshan stood by the city wall. Her cheeks were slightly red from the cold autumn wind. She crossed her arms and looked at the lights in front of her. Suddenly, she understood something. But the divine light disappeared immediately. She did not know where it went. She frowned slightly and continued to look at the city. Ning Ke was also looking at the city. He sat on Yanming Mountain and looked across the lake. The scene across the lake was a fragment of Chang'an City. His and Sangsang's house was also there. No one lived there for a long time. It was dark and cold. He looked at it for a long time and remembered many things. When he received the challenge from Monk Guanhai, he pondered for a long time by the lake and learned a lot. Of course, most of the past was related to Sang Sang. But he did not feel anything. He was very tired. He fell into a deep sleep in the cold night. When he woke up, there were still no lights across the lake. Because it was dawn. The sound of peddlers came from the morning fog. After the morning fog dispersed, the residential streets were occupied by the steam from the bun shops. People gradually came to life. It turned out that the other side was not so cold. Ning Ke looked in that direction and vaguely captured something. Have a good weekend. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 763. Ning Ke got up, brushed off the grass and dew on his body, and walked to the other side of the lake. There was a patch of white autumn reeds on the east side of the lake, and a wooden bridge was hidden in the reeds. He walked across the bridge, through the side door and alley of his house, and came to the noisy morning market. In the mortal world. The emperor was dead, but the people were still alive. The war continued, and so did life. The steam from the bun shop spread like fog on the street, and the soup from the noodle shop drenched the bluestone road. The people queued up to buy breakfast, and talked about the news in the neighborhood as usual. Of course, the topics included the war at the border, and some women were worried about their nephews in the army. Ning Ke walked to the bun shop, listening to the sound of boiling water in the steamer, looking at the steam in front of him, listening to the simple words, and watching the cute action of the children tearing the paper of the bun. He suddenly felt something. It was in front of this bun shop that he met Daoshi monk, and saw a bun in the wilderness. It was a 1,000-year-old grave, and it was the most dangerous battle since he entered the human realm. At that time, the morning wind gradually blew, and Daoshi monk's head rolled down, like a hot bun that was not held by the children because it was too hot. Then, the bluestone road was soaked with blood, thicker than dew, and more fishy than noodle soup. Time passed silently, and the bloodstains from that year could no longer be seen on the bluestone street. The traces of the battle from that year could no longer be seen, and people could not even remember what had happened that morning. The morning market was still the morning market, the bun shop was still the bun shop, and the boss and the cook were still the same, but the children who bought the bun were no longer the children. Was this the power of time? Ning Ke stood in front of the bun shop, silently recalling the scene of the past, and then remembered what happened after Sang Sang placed the black chess piece on the Buddha's chessboard in the cave on Hua Mountain. In the world of Haotian, the highest rules were eternal, such as time and death. Other than that, what other rules could reach that level? The morning light became fuzzy because of the refraction of the steam, as if there were countless fragments of time in it. The street was crowded. Ning Ke stood in the street, closed his eyes, and lowered his head, feeling everything around him. He saw many scenes. The old bloodstains were washed away with clean water, leaving behind some remnants. Then, countless people queuing up to buy the buns stepped on them and took them away from the original ground, leaving no trace on the bluestone. The child held the steaming hot meat buns and walked on the bluestone slabs. The woman used a bamboo basket to catch the steaming buns. She scolded her husband for staying in bed while walking on the bluestone. The woman gradually grew old, and the child from back then had grown up, married, and had children. The old woman was waiting at home, and the children began to line up with their mothers to buy buns. Before they got home, they secretly took one and held it in their hands. Over the years, countless pairs of feet had walked on these bluestone slabs, and the bluestone slab's surface had become extremely smooth. He saw a wasteland full of weeds, a farmer lighting a fire in the middle of the grassland, an old ox taking heavy steps in the field, and black soil being turned over. Rice and wheat began to be planted in the fields, and in autumn, the golden grains grew. The farmers began to harvest the grains. The stone mill slowly turned, grinding out fine white flour, which was then sent to the city to be made into steamed buns or buns. He also saw a lot of images, and thus understood some things. When people walked in the world, they would inevitably leave behind traces. However, as people continued to walk, these traces would disappear without a trace when no one noticed them. This was not the power of time, but the power of man himself. He opened his eyes and looked at the endless flow of people in the morning market, and a smile appeared on his face. This city was very large, and this tactical array was very great. Therefore, after the teacher who represented the entire human world left, no one could be found who could mobilize enough chi of heaven and earth to repair this city and this tactical array. But the human world was still there. That power was still in the human world. Ning Ke did not know what the aura hidden in the human world was. It was not accurate to describe it as power. He could feel the power, and even faintly touched the supreme rules. But he did not know how to describe this feeling. What words should he use to describe it, the taste of life or the smell of smoke and fire? He did not know how to mobilize that aura, but at least he had a clue. Most importantly, for the first time, he truly felt that aura. At that moment, he was connected with the teacher and many predecessors. Therefore, he was in a good mood. He saw Mo Shanshan at the other end of the street. Mo Shanshan looked at Cheng and from the city wall. She did not sleep all night, so she looked very tired. Ning Ke walked to the bun shop, bought 2 hot buns, and then walked to the other end of the street. Beef and radish stuffing, a big bun for 2 coins. He handed the bun to Mo Shanshan. Mo Shanshan took the bun with both hands. Her hands were a little small, and the cotton dress was a little loose. The cuffs covered half of her palms. The bun was very big, and she had to hold it with both hands. She carefully tore off the paper stuck to the bun skin, and then carefully took a bite. She looked very focused and cute. He came to the south gate. He climbed the city wall, and looked at Cheng and in the autumn wind. Have you ever had the experience of staring at a word for a long time, and feeling that the word is getting stranger and stranger? Whether it is the structure or the appearance, it always feels like it is not a word. Of course. I used to think that it was because I got used to understanding the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong. Ning Ke looked at the city under the city wall bathed in the morning light, and then continued, but these 2 days, after looking at Cheng and for a long time, I found that this is a very natural thing. Mo Shanshan said, I only looked at it for a night, but Cheng and is no longer a city in my eyes. Is it a talisman or an array? Neither. I think this city is a person. Mo Shanshan looked at the roads and buildings in the city, and said, this person is called Chang'an. His snow mountain and ocean of chi acupoints are blocked, and he is waiting for us to help him open up all his acupoints. Ning Ke was silent for a moment, and then said, this is very interesting, very similar to me in the past. But because of this, I know that it is basically impossible to open up an ordinary person's chi acupoint. But your acupoints are finally open. Mo Shanshan looked at him and said, so I plan to use your method to cure Chang'an. Ning Ke remembered those past events, but in fact, until now he was not very clear why his snow mountain and ocean of chi suddenly opened up, and why he could cultivate. Mo Shanshan looked at the sky, and said, Chang'an's snow mountain and ocean of chi are the heaven and earth. We cannot command the heaven and earth, so we can only let the heaven and earth do it themselves. There are a few reasons why I can't write today. The first is that Lin Hai Ting Tao released a new book, and I went to be the guest host. My mind isn't clear. The second reason was that the contents of this chapter were too taxing on the brain. This chapter talked about the most fundamental things of Nightfall. Most importantly, in the following scenes, second senior brother would start to stir up trouble. The previous scenes were all small ones, and the next one would be a big one. The problem was, how should I do it? I wasn't confident yet, so I didn't dare to continue. At this moment, I grabbed my hair and thought about it. Today is Saturday, and it's the day to make up for it. Today, I owe everyone 4,000. I will definitely make up for it within 10 days and 2 shifts. I will explain to everyone that it's all Lin Hai and second senior brother's fault. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 764. There was a blockage in a hidden line in the God-stunning array, so the exit of the hidden line was completely blocked. According to the principle of life and death in the tactical array, the flow of the aura of heaven and earth from the north to the south was forced to stop completely, so that the aura of heaven and earth in the city became more and more stagnant until it backflowed and broke the blockage with the help of heaven and earth itself. The prescription that Mo Shanshan gave to Chang and was very simple, but extremely violent. It was hard to imagine that it was made by such a beautiful and gentle girl. If she treated a real person, he would definitely bleed to death after taking the medicine. But if it was Chang and who took the medicine, would it be different? Ning Ke was silent for a long time and asked, where to block it? How? The exit of this line is the south gate, which happens to be the living gate of the God-stunning array. It faces the Vermilion Bird Avenue. If we want to block it, we naturally have to seal this gate. As for the method, Mo Shanshan said, I want to block this gate with stones. Using stones to block the gate sounded fine, but Ning Ke knew that the physical blockage was meaningless to the flow of the aura of heaven and earth in Chang'an. So he immediately understood what she meant. He thought of the countless stones at the bottom of the Daming Lake outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and the tactical array named Stone Array Tactics. Are you confident? He asked. Mo Shanshan shook her head and said, no, but I can't think of any other way. You told me that the last way is the best way, so I want to try. This was indeed what Ning Ke often said. He thought for a while and said, although it is a little risky, it seems to be a little interesting. Time was pressing. The project of sealing the south gate of Vermilion Bird had to be carried out immediately. Ning Ke asked the Azure Dragon gang under the gate to inform Spring Breeze Pavilion, and then informed the palace of this arrangement. The administrative ability of the imperial court of the Tang Empire was perfectly demonstrated in the next few hours. It didn't take long for several tactical array masters and more than 3,000 temporary conscripted workers led by the Ministry of Works and the Imperial Center Administration to arrive at the South Gate. They were all under the command of Mo Shanshan. Mo Shanshan asked, as for the more than 30,000 stones, where can we find so many stones? Ning Ke looked at the houses in the city and said, if it doesn't work, we'll tear them down. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, who had come under the edict, was silent for a moment. He then said in a small voice, there is a lake 3 li south of the city. There are many stones in the lake. In the past, when the manors of the princes and dukes built their manors, without waiting for him to finish his words, Ning Ke said, since there are lake stones, that would be the best. If you have any ideas, why don't you tell Miss Mo directly? Now is not the time for pleasantries. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue agreed. Mo Shanshan asked again, I need a few hundred heavy rocks that weigh more than 10,000 kilograms. Can you move them? The assistant minister of Revenue said, the equipment in the Ministry of Work storeroom is being transported here. Not to mention 10,000 caddies, even 100,000 caddies of heavy stone can be taken out of the lake and transported to the south gate. The imperial court decreed that the south gate of Chang'an would be closed from then on. The grain teams and people would enter and leave through the other gates. Thousands of people, technical officials from the Ministry of Revenue, and array tactical masters volunteered to come. Under Mo Shanshan's command, they began to set up tactical arrays and move giant stones. The south gate suddenly became a big construction site and it was extremely lively. After confirming that there were no other problems, Ning Ke bid farewell to Mo Shanshan. Mo Shanshan asked in surprise, what are you going to do? Ning Ke said, the last way is the best way. But it is not the last moment yet. I want to see if I can find another way. Mo Shanshan did not say anything more. She said calmly, I wish you good luck. Ning Ke bowed and turned to leave. To enter Chang'an from the south gate, one had to pass through the famous Vermilion Bird Avenue. The late autumn sky was sometimes high and sometimes gloomy. It all depended on whether there were any clouds covering the sky. When Ning Ke walked along the Vermilion Bird Avenue to the north, a cloud floated in from outside the city and blocked the sunlight from the sky. It cast a large shadow and lowered the temperature in the city. The stone statues on the Vermilion Bird Avenue also appeared much darker because of the change in the light. The autumn wind blew and there were raindrops falling. The cold autumn rain chased the pedestrians on the street to the side. Ning Kai did not leave. He still stood where he was. He reached behind him and wanted to take out the big black umbrella. But he only touched the hilt of his knife. Then he remembered that the big black umbrella was no longer with him. The big black horse and the horse carriage were also not with him. Sang Sang was also not with him. Ning Kai thought of the feeling when he and Sang Sang saw it for the first time. He thought of the old days when he was covered in blood and fell in front of it. He was silent and had very complicated feelings. When the headmaster of the academy took him and Sang Sang to the human world for the last time, they had returned to Chang'an. At that time, the Vermilion Bird appeared in the black horse carriage. The Vermilion Bird was a divine talisman in the God-stunning array. Ning Kai was the owner of the God-stunning array. Moreover, they were teacher. So at this time, although they did not speak, they seemed to have a telepathic connection. They looked at each other without words. Only emotions and thoughts echoed between him and the Vermilion Bird. You are only at the peak of the knowing destiny state. Ning Kai looked at the Vermilion Bird painting that looked more and more lively after being wet by the rain. He thought silently in his heart, what's the use for a powerhouse like the Abbey Dean? Young Erxi took back the pitchfork, panting, and stood in the field to rest with it. There was a grave in front of him. The soil on it was very fresh and had just been piled up. The pig trotters on the pitchfork had been given to the refugees. Recently, he began to fight with the grassland barbarian's machete. But the pitchfork in his hand was getting sharper and sharper because he used it more often. The pitchfork was much better for digging up soil than the machete. These days, he dug many graves and buried the bodies of many of his companions. When he had enough rest, young Erxi spat and shouted to his companions not far away. Then he put the pitchfork on his shoulder and walked wearily to the forest in the west. In this wilderness, more than 2,000 new graves were built. They were very small and simple graves. The Tang army would never leave any of its companions, whether alive or dead. Even if they could not do it during the war, they would try their best to find the bodies of their companions after the war. But this was originally the territory of the Tang Empire. The soldiers were buried here, which meant that they were buried in their hometown. It was said that when His Majesty returned to Chang'an, there was only a box of ashes. These dead soldiers had nothing to complain about. Not long after the war began, Cao Shaoshu led the valiant cavalry battalion out of Chang'an and went straight to the eastern border to fight with the grassland cavalry. In the following days, there were constantly voluntary retired soldiers joining them. At the same time, there were also the northeast border military soldiers who had withdrawn from the Yen territory. The number of soldiers was increasing. Now the army had more than 30,000 people and was officially named the Volunteer Army by the imperial court. But because of the lack of equipment, especially war horses, they were still at a disadvantage compared to the grassland cavalry. Just yesterday, the Volunteer Army of the eastern border and the grassland cavalry had a real battle. The disadvantaged Volunteer Army won the final victory with unimaginable courage. For this, on this eastern border field, thousands of Volunteer Army paid the price with their lives. However, what made Cao Shaoshu and the generals of the valiant cavalry battalion vigilant was that no one had ever found Prince Long Qing and those fallen commanders in this fierce battle. What made them even more uneasy was that the most powerful papal cavalrymen of the Divine Hall and the grassland elites were nowhere to be found. Cao Shaoshu looked at the forest in the west and thought of the urgent military report sent by Pingyuan County. His face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. He said, "They have gone to Chang'an." The volunteer army of the eastern border had fought continuously and had difficulties in providing logistical support. They were already extremely exhausted. To be able to defeat most of the grassland cavalry in the battle yesterday was already an extraordinary performance. At this time, even if they knew that Prince Long Qing was heading straight for Chang'an with a group of elites, they had no ability to respond, let alone intercept them in front of them. Lu Vi listened to Cao Xiaoshu's judgment and his expression became extremely solemn. But he was still somewhat puzzled. He said, most of the barbarian cavalrymen are scattered in the eastern border. Although Long Qing's subordinates are elites, it is absolutely impossible for them to attack Chang'an. This was the reason why Cao Xiaoshu's face was as cold as frost. It was obviously meaningless. Why was Long Qing willing to give up so many troops just to buy time to attack Chang'an? There was only one explanation. Long Qing firmly believed that when his cavalry arrived, Chang'an would definitely fall. The verdant canyon was in front of the Green Mountains. Before the Green Mountains was a plain. Most of this flat and fertile field belonged to Qinghe Prefecture, and a small part was expropriated by the military ministry. Other than the meadows, there were many fields that had been cultivated for many years. After several days of bloody battles, the autumn grass had long been covered with blood. Tens of thousands of acres of fertile land had been trampled into mud by the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Too many tragedies had happened this autumn. The farmers had fled in all directions, and the rice in the fields had not been harvested. They were powerless in the wind and looked like criminals waiting to be hanged. On the right front of the verdant canyon, there was a relatively flat rice field that had not been trampled by the cavalry. The rice in the field was densely packed and golden, looking very beautiful. Yi Su was in this rice field. He walked toward the verdant canyon. The wind rose with his footsteps, and the golden ears of rice were blown in all directions. Then, they bounced up like a golden ocean. Then, the ocean of rice gradually parted, opening a path for him. The sea of rice had to give way because of the thin wooden sword. After Kuhaoran, Jun Mo was the proudest person in the academy. He was the legendary Mr. Second. Yi Su was a Haotian Taoism genius who had seen through life and death more than 10 years ago. He was also a legendary figure. They were truly people who did not live in this world. When these two people met, who would be the stronger one? In the field in front of the Green Mountains, all eyes were on the rice field and the wooden sword. It was quiet between heaven and earth. Only the warhorses neighed and kicked their hooves anxiously. For more than 2 days, the cavalrymen, who had been ready to attack at any time, got off their horses. They knew that they could not interfere in this battle. It was a battle for the dignity of the powerhouses. In the sacred sedan, Yi Hongyu looked at the verdant canyon silently, her fingers lightly touching the blood-red divine robe. Yi Su came to the verdant canyon. He looked at the iron canopy, then at the scorched black armor on Second Brother's body. Finally, his eyes fell on the iron sword. He frowned slightly and was about to say something. Second Brother's voice sounded first. It was still as serious as ever. He looked at Yi Su and said, "You are standing in the wrong place." Yi Su did not expect to hear such a sentence. He calmed himself down and asked seriously, "What's wrong?" "That is the field, not the road." Second Brother said, "The road is for walking, and the field is for growing food. There is a road, but you chose to walk from the field. That is a waste of food. Of course, it is wrong." The disciples of the academy in front of the verdant canyon were a little nervous because of Yi Su's arrival, but now they could not help but laugh. They felt that it was just like how Senior Brother had taught them all these years. There was no nonsense, no frown, no hesitation. He just said one sentence when he saw you. Because you were wrong, he would say you were wrong. Second Brother was such a person. No matter if the other party was a Haotian Taoism wayfarer or an emperor's prostitute, as long as you were wrong, you should be taught a lesson. This was Second Brother's rule. Everything in the world was big and small. Wasting food was wrong. Standing in the wrong place was wrong. Wearing secular clothes but wearing a Taoist bun was also wrong. In Second Brother's eyes, Yi Su was full of problems, which made him very unhappy and even a little disappointed. Yi Su could feel his emotions and could not help but laugh. He thought that Jun Mo was indeed the legendary temperament. He smiled and said, "Your way is no longer suitable. Moreover, this is a war. Second brother said, what is suitable for the time. Planting rice and harvesting is something that will last for 1,000 years. How can it be changed because of the situation? Yi Su gradually stopped smiling and said, how can you control others? Second brother said, the Battle of the Verdant Canyon lasted for more than 2 days. I did not show mercy to any enemy who trampled on the field. Although those cavalrymen did not know, they knew to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. That is why the field you are in is left. Yi Su looked around the sea of rice and became slightly serious. Last night, with the permission of the disciples of the Academy, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army collected the corpses overnight. At this time, there were not many corpses left in front of the Verdant Canyon, but the blood was still in the field. There should have been a large rice field next to the sea of rice where he was. At this time, the rice field had been trampled into a wasteland. The rice was scattered on the ground, and the scene was very bleak. The blood in the rice field was the deepest and most condensed, like pulp. Yi Su then knew that Jun Mo did not lie. As expected, all the cavalrymen who trampled on the field were killed by him. In such a fierce battle, a slight distraction would lead to the destruction of the sword and the death of the person. However, under such circumstances, second brother still did not forget to use the iron sword to enforce his rules. What kind of person was he? Yi Su stood in the rice field and was silent for a long time. He reached out to pluck an ear of rice and gently rubbed it. Looking at the soil soaked in blood under his feet, he said, I don't want to be taught. How can you teach me? Second brother said, you are wrong, so I will teach you. If you don't want to be taught, I will beat you until you do. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 765. If you don't agree, I'll beat you until you do. Actually, this was not second brother's rule, but the rule of the Academy. It sounded a little overbearing and unreasonable, but in fact, it was reasonable. Yi Su was not angry. He said calmly, reason has nothing to do with force. Jun Mo, even if you can defeat me, you can't make me agree with you. The truth comes from Haotian, and reason comes from the evaluation of reality and from the teachings of sages. Mr. First can teach me, but you can't. Since it didn't make sense, there was no need to say anything more. For people at Jun Mo and Yi Su's level, their conversation was just a casual chat, or it could be said that it was limited to the words themselves. One stood in front of the Verdant Canyon, and the other in the rice field. The hundreds of thousands of people watching the battle in the field looked nervously in the direction of the Verdant Canyon. They did not know how the battle would start, when they would attack, or who would attack first. At some point in time, Yi Su made his move. The attack of the genius of Haotian Taoism against the genius of the Academy was different from what everyone had imagined. There was no earth-shattering, no rolling rocks, and no terrible power. Instead, it seemed extremely calm. The thin wooden sword flew from Yi Su to the Verdant Canyon. It was calm and silent. The rice field in front of the sword parted like a willow branch in the lake. Countless eyes stared at the wooden sword. Some were surprised, some were puzzled, and some were even disappointed. However, in the next moment, a shocking scene appeared in front of the Verdant Canyon. As the wooden sword flew, a cloud suddenly appeared in front of the Verdant Canyon. The cloud was dozens of feet thick and extremely dark. Thunder and lightning could be vaguely seen in it. It was very low to the ground, only more than 100 feet. Looking from a distance, it seemed to touch the ground. The exit of the Verdant Canyon was covered by the cloud. Between the cloud and the ground was the iron canopy and Jun Mo outside. The fourth brother took a few decoctions and was slightly refreshed. However, looking at the cloud in the sky and feeling the aura of heaven and earth contained in it, his arms holding the sand table trembled again. He was shocked. A cultivator who could use such a method must have a terrifying understanding of the origin and laws of the aura of heaven and earth. This is the true peak of the 5 realms. Yi Su is indeed a genius of Taoism. Fourth brother looked at the wooden sword flying in the paddy field and said absent-mindedly, second brother uses the power of heaven and earth to cut people with his iron sword. Yi Su is also using the power of heaven and earth now. Their realms are similar. Seventh sister Muyu asked worriedly, who is stronger? Fourth brother said, I don't know. Lu Bai is probably the only one who can see it. The verdant canyon was covered by white clouds. In the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, there were many priests, cultivators, and papal cavalrymen who had participated in the war in the wilderness in spring. They had seen this cloud and seen the most powerful warrior of the desolate, Tang, being beaten up by this cloud. So when they saw this scene, they were shocked and excited. In the divine sedan, Yi Hongyu slowly raised her head and looked at the white clouds. A complicated emotion appeared in the depths of her eyes. Then, all these emotions turned into indifference on her face. When she chased after Long Qing at the frontier fortress in the north of Yan Kingdom, she had seen this cloud by the waist-deep blue sea. So the meaning of this cloud to her was different from that to the others in the West Hill Divine Palace. Lu Bai looked at the white clouds in the verdant canyon and did not speak. The clouds in the verdant canyon were white. But because they were too low to the ground and too dense, they became very gloomy and dark, just like the dark clouds that would rain in midsummer. The color of the wooden sword was light white, just like Yi Su's clothes. After flying down from the dark clouds, it suddenly became very conspicuous. It looked like a slow lightning bolt. Suddenly, a bright light flashed in the dark clouds. Then, countless bright lights emerged from the depths of the clouds and turned into countless bolts of lightning. They looked like countless light swords, terrifying light swords. The lightning did not last only for a moment. It pierced through the clouds and fell on the field more than 100 feet below. Then came the roar of thunder. Countless terrible muffled thunders smashed toward the verdant canyon. Second brother's armor had been scorched black by Yi Hongyu's tens of thousands of Taoist sword fireworks in the battle yesterday. At this time, it reflected the countless bright bolts of lightning that fell from the sky, like countless light snakes crawling on the black soil. He held the iron sword, his posture straight and his expression serious. The tall hat was fastened to the helmet, and it remained unmoving amidst the lightning and thunder. His eyebrows did not even tremble a bit. His expression was so dignified. The dark clouds were pressing down, and there were tens of thousands of lightning and thunder. But he seemed to be attending a banquet. He did not watch from the side, nor did he look sideways. He did not look at the clouds or the sword. He only looked at Yi Su in the rice field in the distance. He raised the iron sword in his hand, leveled it, and made an ancient salute. As he held his sword horizontally, the autumn wind that was blowing toward him immediately became silent, becoming silent. The thunder and lightning finally fell. There were countless terrible roars in front of the verdant canyon. Countless bolts of lightning struck the ground almost instantaneously, carrying with them a terrifying power. The dark clouds twisted restlessly, and the lightning drilled into the green mountains like snakes, causing the rocks to collapse. Second brother leveled the sword, and the autumn wind suddenly became cold. Even the space in front of him seemed to have been drawn into countless squares by the wide and straight iron sword, and then turned into square frames, and finally into thin strips. Countless bolts of lightning fell on his body and entered those spaces. The lightning that should have been zigzagging suddenly became straight and bright lines. The lightning flashed and the thunder continued. The surface of the scorched armor reflected the lightning, and it became brighter and brighter. The soldiers of the coalition army who were watching the battle in the southern field felt as if they were looking at the sun. Their eyes were pierced with extreme pain, and they hurriedly covered their eyes. Those who reacted slower cried out in pain. The cultivators also closed their eyes and used their psyche power to sense the changes in the verdant canyon. They sensed the pure and majestic aura of heaven and earth contained in the lightning and were shocked speechless by the wooden sword. Perhaps it was only a moment, but to the hundreds of thousands of people watching the battle, it felt like hundreds of millions of years had passed. The clouds in the verdant canyon finally dissipated, the thunder stopped, and the lightning naturally disappeared. The smoke and dust gradually settled, and the figure of second brother slowly appeared. He stood in front of the verdant canyon. His armor was as scorched as before, and his expression was as serious and upright as before. The iron sword was still leveled between his eyebrows, and his posture was so standard that even the strictest etiquette professor could not find any problems with it. On the ground in front of him, there were thousands of finger-thick black holes on the ground. Each black hole was a bolt of lightning drawn by Yi Su's wooden sword. The black holes were bottomless, and one could imagine their power. What was shocking was that these black holes were all in front of second brother, and the ground behind him was as flat as before. Not a single one of the tens of thousands of lightning bolts landed on his body, and not a single one landed on the iron canopy behind him. Thousands of black holes were neatly arranged in front of him, and they looked like a straight line. Thunder and lightning had supreme power. It came from heaven and earth, and only submitted to the rules of nature. However, it could not cross the line in front of second brother. The etiquette of the academy was the rule. This line was the rule that second brother guarded with his iron sword. It was his etiquette. If there was a rule, it must be obeyed, no matter whose sword it was, whether it was wind, rain, or lightning. The clouds should be in the sky, in the mountains, and should not be so low. How could thunder and lightning disturb me? Today, I finished 2 chapters. I was very happy. I wanted to write more to make up for yesterday's, but strangely, my cervical vertebra, which has been fine for days, suddenly became very uncomfortable. I still did not sleep on a pillow. After thinking about it, I found that there was only one possibility. I slept for 12 hours today, and I slept too much. Alas. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 766. The clouds and thunder dispersed. The wooden sword shook slightly and flew back to the sea of rice from the verdant canyon. Yi Su raised his eyebrows slightly. He knew that Jun Mo was strong, but he didn't expect him to be so strong. Only by surpassing the threshold of the 5 states could he create his own rules in Haotian's world. Second brother did not surpass the 5 states, but he found his strongest belief in the established rules of Haotian's world and made those rules his own. From a certain point of view, this kind of method had already surpassed the limits of Realm 5. Yi Su's eyebrows gradually calmed down. He had already drawn his sword. Now it was second brother's turn. He looked at the verdant canyon and waved his arms. He put his sleeves behind his back and said calmly, "Please." Second brother drew his sword. His sword was simpler. The broad and straight iron sword left his right hand and the verdant canyon. The iron sword was about a man's height above the ground and slowly flew toward the rice field. There was a distance between the verdant canyon and the rice field, and the land was stained with blood. It was not fresh blood, but the blood of countless cavalrymen and warhorses 2 days ago. The plains were soaked in blood. It was black and gave off a pungent smell of blood. Especially the field in front of the sea of rice, it was stained with blood and the color of the soil had changed. The iron sword flew over the blood-stained field without any smell of blood. But there was a sense of death. It wasn't deathly silence, nor was it despair. It was a resolute thought. It was extremely chilling. Today, he met Yi Su in front of the verdant canyon. Meeting was not an encounter, because the swords in their hands had never met. His iron sword was to meet Yi Su's wooden sword. This iron sword had already killed thousands of people. The blood on the field was all caused by this iron sword. It was the iron sword's own blood. When the iron sword met his own blood, it was full of momentum and chilling to the extreme. They had just met each other with courtesy, and now they met with swords. Even Yi Su would not be able to dodge such a domineering strike. He could only raise his sword to meet it. In the distant southern wilderness, Lu Bai slowly stood up beside the carriage. He looked at the iron sword in the verdant canyon and said, "This sword is finally interesting." The Battle of Verdant Canyon lasted for more than 2 days. The most powerful man in the world did not make a move because he was waiting for Jun Mo to enter his strongest state. Otherwise, it would be meaningless. At this moment, looking at this iron sword, he finally made an interesting evaluation. This also meant that he believed that second brother had already entered his strongest state, and he really wanted to receive this sword. This iron sword was indeed interesting. It was even more interesting than what Lu Bai had imagined. The iron sword still represented second brother's rule. Black or white, no gray. Life or death, it was impossible to satisfy both. Fight or lose, there was no escape. In the face of such a decisive sword, no matter who it was, they had to make the most decisive choice and decision. You must choose a path. You must choose a direction. There was no third path in the world, and the weeds on the wall could not fall to their own positions. This iron sword had already surpassed the scope of tyranny. It faintly exuded a sense of righteousness. "I'll give you a chance to choose, then I'll crush you and kill you." This was the way of the king. What would you choose between life and death? Even if you had really seen through life and death still existed. Seeing through did not mean that you could break through. Instead, because you saw too much, you would not know how to choose. If you did not choose, you would fail. This was the difficult problem that the iron sword gave Yi Su. Yi Su did not take this iron sword. Because the iron sword represented his rule. Once he took it, it was equivalent to accepting his rule. Then, no matter how the battle developed, he could not change the passive situation. But the iron sword wanted him to take it. What could he do? Yi Su let the paddy field take the iron sword. This paddy field was his rule. Before the iron sword left the verdant canyon, he had already put his hands behind his back and slightly waved his sleeves. A breeze came out of his sleeves, and the golden paddy was gently shaken and sometimes bent. The wide and straight iron sword entered the paddy field. The paddy field gradually separated, like a lake, like the sea, like green pines in the green mountains. The weeds on the ridges were stained with blood. The unharvested paddy field was stained with blood. Wherever the iron sword passed, the weeds were broken into pieces, flying up and falling in the paddy field. The heavy ears of rice fell with the sword intent. Without the heavy burden, the paddy field suddenly straightened up and flicked the rice leaves into the air. The ears of rice fell to the ground. Before they hit the ground, the rice was peeled off and danced with the leaves. The bran on the paddy field cracked, revealing the round rice grains. The rice grains were scattered in the autumn wind, like pearls reflecting the sunlight. It was extremely beautiful. The rice grains scattered in the air were burnt yellow by the sunlight, emitting a rice fragrance. The rice grains that fell to the ground were soaked black by the blood and quietly sank into the soil. Green rice leaves grew in the soil. The rice leaves stretched into the air, as if to be firm. In a very short time, the paddy field experienced harvesting, death, and rebirth. The life and death of the paddy field were performed in front of people. This process was very continuous. The cycle of life and death became a perfect integration, without any clear dividing line. The iron sword flying in the paddy field did not find the dividing line either. The iron sword was still moving forward in silence. The paddy field grew rapidly, making a rustling sound. A hurricane came from the iron sword, roaring above the paddy field. The wooden sword was suspended in the air in front of Yi Su, being blown up and down by the hurricane. In the raging paddy field, the wooden sword was like an inconspicuous boat. The boat had no power. It was swaying in the stormy waves with the help of the paddy field and the sword wind. No matter how big the waves were, no matter how strong the wind was, the boat did not sink. It was faintly discernible in the black sea water and the white waves, sometimes sinking and sometimes floating. A moment ago, the boat sank into the dead and cold bottom of the sea. A moment later, the boat floated to the surface of the sea and saw the blue sky of life. Because the boat had no deck or cabin. The boat was the wooden sword. The wooden sword was the simplest piece of wood. In the sea of life and death, the wooden sword was floating aimlessly. It did not seek life or death. Neither could it seek life or death. After a long time, the wind gradually stopped, and the paddy field became quiet, as if nothing had happened. Only the new green seedlings in the soil of the paddy field proved something. Yisu stretched out his hand and caught a few rice grains in the air above the paddy field. The freshly peeled rice was plump. It was roasted by the sun until it was yellow and fragrant. He picked up a grain of rice with his finger and put it in his mouth. He chewed slowly with a smile on his face. It had a genuine taste. More than 10 years ago, I traveled around many countries. I thought I had seen through life and death. Since then, I had no more fear. What I thought was the direction of my sword, and my heart of sword was clear. Yisu scattered the remaining rice grains in his palm into the paddy field and said with a smile, "If it were me at that time, I would have to take your sword and I would lose." Until a few years ago, on the top of the snow-capped peak in the wilderness, I stabbed Mr. First with my sword through the air with the clear wool of sword against the sky full of sunshine. Then I realized how wrong I was. Yisu stopped smiling and said calmly, "Because my sword, which I thought had seen through life and death, didn't hit Mr. First at all. It didn't even stir up the water in the pond. Because Mr. First was reading by the pond. He didn't see my sword at all. He didn't even think about it." At that time, I realized, seeing through life and death is the same as not seeing through. Later, I went to Chang'an and lived in a dilapidated Taoist temple for a long time. I saw the Taoist temple collapse and the neighborhood's eaves break. I was no longer in the secular world, but in the secular world. I began to repair the eaves for the neighborhood. I built the Taoist temple brick by brick. Only then did I understand the meaning of breaking and building again. Yisu looked at the blood water at the edge of the paddy field and said, "Blood represents death, but the field watered by it is extremely fertile. The blood rice in this field will be very delicious next year. Destruction and rebirth. This is life. There is no death in the world." Second brother looked at him who was standing in the paddy field and suddenly said, "There is death." Yisu said, "I admit it. But at least it is not within the time limit of you and me." Second brother said, "In your mind, there is only life and death. How can you break through it? What the Buddhism and Taoism sects pursue is the final peace." Yisu said, "Breaking through life and death is for peace. But now I understand that death is eternal and life is luck. There are great joys and sorrows in between. Why must I be peaceful? That kind of peace is fake. Before life and death, there should be sorrow or joy. That is the real truth. This is my view of life and death now. This view of life and death is very simple. It seems to be powerless, but no external force can break it. No matter your iron sword or anything else." After hearing this, second brother was silent for a moment and said, "You are close to the Tao." Yisu said, "I haven't reached the Tao." Second brother said, "However, your Tao has deviated from the Tao of Haotian." Yisu said, "The Tao is in the heart of heaven. Maybe this is the Tao that Haotian wants me to understand." Second brother said, "If Haotian says that your Tao is not the Tao, what will you do?" Yisu looked at the scattered rice at his feet and the new green seedlings in the soil. After a long silence, he slowly raised his head and said calmly, "I still have my sword." He reached out to the golden sea of rice. He held the wooden sword. Everyone had his own Tao. It had nothing to do with faith, but it didn't mean that he was not pious. It was just that people like Yi Su would inevitably follow his own path. Second brother's question was a real question. Yi Su's answer was also a real answer. He was ready. This represented a shocking fact. If Haotian agreed with his Tao, he would still be pious. If Haotian didn't agree with his Tao, he still had his sword. Because what was done could not be undone. He was willing to be the fool who carved the boat to seek the sword. Yi Su was a genius of Haotian Taoism and the firmest believer of Haotian. Otherwise, the Abbey Dean wouldn't have accepted him as a disciple. No one knew when he had undergone such a change. Was it on the snow-capped peak in the wilderness or in a small Taoist temple in Chang'an? In any case, he held his sword. This sword dared to ask heaven. How powerful it must be. Now, he was still a believer of Haotian. The wayfarer of Haotian Taoism. He didn't need to ask heaven for this sword. He came to ask Jun Mo. Would Jun Mo be able to handle it? Shaking my head. It's too hard to write. It's too hard to write recently. My IQ is really annoying. I frowned and scratched my hair to write. I hope everyone thinks it's okay. There's still one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 767. Jun Mo and Yi Su were both proud and powerful people. However, no one knew whether they were powerful because of their pride or because they were powerful. 2 years ago, they met in the Lank Temple in the autumn rain. They fought each other proudly and did not look at the rain or the sword. But because of the Buddhism sect, they did not enjoy themselves. Today, they met again and each made a sword move, sharing the autumn scenery in front of the verdant canyon. The third sword was about to come. It was just the third sword. It seemed that the battle had just begun. But both the two people fighting and the hundreds of thousands of people watching in the field felt that this was the sword that would decide life and death. 18 years ago in the wilderness, at the other end of the black line, because of the son of Yama, Yi Su's Taoist heart was stimulated and he used the most powerful sword move in his youth. He cut the small tree into 53,333 pieces. After that, he traveled around various countries and his state increased again. The wooden sword in his hand became slower and slower. In an instant, thousands of swords became thousands, hundreds, and finally only one sword. Because one sword was enough. As the autumn wind blew, the chi of heaven and earth in front of the verdant canyon seemed to be attracted by the wooden sword and rushed in from all directions. The sunlight falling from the sky was refracted into strange shapes, as if thousands of horses were galloping. Frightened by this, countless golden rice grains were blown away by the wind, heading north. A golden wave was born in the field, and the wooden sword moved between the rice waves like a swift boat. Yi Su did not stay there. His clothes fluttered and he followed the wooden sword. The golden waves pushed the boat like wooden sword. Under the influence of the majestic chi of heaven and earth, it became faster and faster. It was about to become a flash of lightning. But Yi Su's figure always followed the sword's shadow. No one could fly so fast. Riding on a sword was just a legend. To be more precise, except for the headmaster, there was no such legend in the world. Yi Su was not riding on a sword. The wooden sword was the boat. He was on the boat. The boat carried him. He was not the one pushing the boat. There was a strong wind in the rice field. Yi Su disappeared. The next moment, he came to Jun Mo. He held the handle of the wooden sword. He bent his knees, lowered his waist, straightened his elbow, and did not turn his wrist. The wooden sword pierced Jun Mo's left chest. An incomparably bright and wholly divine light shone on the blade of the sword. The sun above the verdant canyon seemed to dim a little when he struck with his sword. It was not Tianqi, but the fusion of the sword and heaven and earth. He had transformed Haotian's will into his own sword will. This was the will of the heavens. The wooden sword contained heaven's will. How could he avoid it? The wooden sword that contained the will of heaven was even harder to answer than the iron sword from before. Life and death could be ignored, but heaven's will could not be avoided. Junmo remembered the sentence his teacher had repeated many times. There was no omniscient and omnipotent existence, except for Haotian. He knew that he could not avoid Yisu's sword, so he did not dodge. He didn't even look at the wooden sword that was stabbing into his chest. Instead, he raised his iron sword and chopped down. Chopping was a very simple action. What he did was very simple. He just chopped down. If the question was difficult to answer, then he would not answer it. Just like the calculation problem he wrote for Chunpipi before he entered the second floor, it was too complicated to calculate, so he did not calculate it. If the knot was difficult to untie, then he would not untie it. Just like how Teek tied his hair into a knot because the bath water was cold, it was too troublesome to untie, so he did not untie it. If the youngest brother did not answer, then he would use the sect rules to deal with him. If the seventh sister did not untie it, then he would cut it with scissors. If the wooden sword was difficult to answer, then he would not answer it. If it was difficult to avoid, then he would not avoid it. He held the iron sword, like picking up the sect rule ruler and picking up scissors, and then he chopped down. Junmo had always regarded the youngest uncle as his idol. He had not learned the Great Spirit, but he had learned the Haoran sword. The Great Spirit was about moving forward bravely. The iron sword in his hand seemed to be able to lift up all the boulders in the verdant canyon. It was extremely magnificent and made people feel relaxed and happy. In front of this simple and carefree iron sword, there was no God or Buddha, nor heaven. Junmo looked calm. He was confident that his iron sword could cut Yisu in half before the wooden sword reached him. This was not a mutual destruction, but a test of each other's courage. Courage was a kind of pride. Everyone knew that the second brother of the academy was the proudest person in the world. He was the bravest man in the world. The blood in the field in front of the verdant canyon and the countless cavalrymen who died under his sword had all proved this. Yisu was also very proud, because of the pride shown by Junmo at this time. He did not dodge. The wooden sword moved forward and pierced Junmo's left chest. The seemingly blunt and edgeless wooden sword instantly sank into the charred black armor. The hidden talisman lines under the armor suddenly lit up, emitting a strong aura. The iron sword fell, but did not cut Yisu's neck, because it was blocked by the scabbard on his back. In the blazing light, the seemingly inconspicuous scabbard was like a sail in the raging sea, blocking the power of the wind and giving the boat strength to move forward. The tip of the iron sword pierced into the scabbard. Because the sword was wide and straight, it could not pierce through. All of this was real, but also not real. The iron sword was not an iron sword, the wooden sword was not a wooden sword, and the scabbard was not a scabbard. The most basic structure of these things was filled with endless chi of heaven and earth. This was no longer a battle between swords, but a battle between psyche power, a battle between two worlds. Endless chi of heaven and earth violently rushed in and was instantly swallowed by an invisible vortex, entering the world of the two, and then violently exploding through the sword or the scabbard. The chi of heaven and earth in front of the verdant canyon was compressed to the extreme, and the refracted light became even more distorted. Because of the compression, the chi of heaven and earth began to rub against each other, producing scorching flames. If Yisu's sword at the beginning was like a small sun in front of the verdant canyon, then a real sun seemed to be born in front of the verdant canyon at this time. Endless light and heat sprayed into the field. What a dazzling scene it was. The hearts of those who saw this scene would sway. Unfortunately, just like when the headmaster killed a god in the wilderness, because the light was too bright, few people could see this scene. Lu Bai could see it. So could Yi Hongyu. She had been silent in the sacred sedan with her head down, as if she did not care about the situation in the verdant canyon. Finally, she could not help but look up. In the light, Jun Mo's iron sword continued to press down. With a light hiss, the scabbard on Yi Su's back was torn open. Yi Su looked indifferent, and the wooden sword in his hand continued to move forward. The wooden sword shortened inch by inch, and part of it entered Jun Mo's chest. More of it was crushed into the finest powder, and then it burned fiercely like a candle. The current situation depended on whether the iron sword would break the sail first or the wooden sword would break the armor first. The candle would eventually turn into ashes. The burning wooden sword became shorter and shorter, but it still did not break Jun Mo's armor. In the blazing light, Yi Su's face became transparent, and there was still no expression on it. He continued to move forward with the sword. In the end, there was only a hilt left, a bare hilt. With a clear roar, Yi Su slammed the entire sword hilt into Jun Mo's chest. In the past, his wooden sword had no hilt or scabbard. Now, his sword had a hilt and a scabbard. Because over the years, his cultivation had been regressing. He was moving forward and backward. From 10,000 swords to one sword, from seeing through to not seeing through, from the outside world to the inside world. But in this battle today, he had been moving forward and had not taken a step back. His scabbard was the bond he had comprehended in the world. His sword hilt was all his spirit on sword Taoism. He used the scabbard to bind the edge of the iron sword, and then slapped all the sword style into Jun Mo's chest. Jun Mo's cultivation over the years was as simple as his iron sword. Forward, forward, and forward. There was no retreat, and there was no return. He advanced towards the peaks one by one. Just as Yi Su slapped the hilt into his chest, he suddenly let go of the sword hilt. The iron sword was too wide and straight, like his eyebrows. It could not be in the world or in the scabbard. At least in a short time, he could not break Yi Su's scabbard. Just like solving a problem, he would not break it. He let go of the sword hilt and made a concession for the first time in his cultivation. But his left foot, in the sky full of light, took a step forward. His right hand clenched into a fist, holding the infinite light in the autumn wind, and smashed toward Yi Su. Jun Mo, who was moving forward, made a concession for the first time. Yi Su, who retreated in order to advance, moved forward resolutely. The two peerless geniuses of the cultivation world, in this thrilling battle, chose the other's best method at the same time, but no one knew who would win in the end. When the sword hilt sank into the scorched black armor, a tearing sound was heard in the whole field. It seemed that the sky was torn apart by someone. Jun Mo's armor did not change much, and there were some tiny sawdust left on it. Behind him, there was an extremely terrifying sword essence. The sword style pierced into the verdant canyon, piercing a deep hole in the cliff. Just the overflowing sword style had such amazing power. What would Jun Mo, who was facing all the sword style, do? Almost at the same time, Jun Mo's fist landed on Yi Su's body. His fist held infinite light, which was the chi of heaven and earth in front of the verdant canyon. And in this chi of heaven and earth, there was an unimaginable amount of sword style. The sword style of the iron sword even contained Yi Su's own sword style. Jun Mo let go of the iron sword, and then held countless swords. When his fist landed on Yi Su's body, it felt as if 10,000 swords had landed on Yi Su's body. The spring wind blew the willows, and the thin leaves fell into the water. The morning sun rose, and the lake glowed with golden light. On the winter snow lake, the wind was like a knife. It was quiet in front of the verdant canyon. Countless pairs of eyes fell on that place again, looking nervously at the two people standing opposite them. After an unknown period of time, Yi Su suddenly coughed, and there were countless fine cuts on his plain clothes. He looked at Jun Mo and said with emotion, "If you didn't have this armor, I wouldn't have lost." There are no ifs in this world. There was no joy on Jun Mo's face, and he said indifferently, "If you want to say if, then if I don't have armor and you don't have scabbard, I win. If you don't have swords and I don't have swords, I win. If it were 18 years ago, I would have won." If it were 18 years later, I would still win. He finally said, so no matter what, I win. There are no ifs. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.